here right now. So I say let's get it started then. So good morning, everyone. My name is David Zumba. This is the October 14, 2011 EAAC meeting. I think I'll just start with just one personal observation. Congratulations to the Capitals for beating the Penguins last night in hockey. We'll get you next time. So there's a few people here I know that are picking on me, so I'll just acknowledge the win for you, and we can just move along, please. All right. So is Richard Ray on the call?
Yes, this is Richard. I'm here, and I would ask everyone who speaks up, would you please identify yourself before you begin speaking, and also in terms of the broadcast is not working. I'm unable to see it at this moment. And also, I'm saying hello, I'm here, I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Richard. I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to add, but just another note. I do have the hand raising tool up and running right here too. So for those that are online or in the services, just please go ahead and use that. I'll do my best as always to try to acknowledge and get everyone's questions brought into the meeting. So really, we have pretty much a full day dedicated to the recommendations and report document. So that's going to be a good part of the day from the subcommittees, and then the coordination committee will kind of brief at the end a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about process and kind of go through some ideas and make sure it's clear to everyone on what's happening, kind of how it's going to happen, and hope everybody leaves here today with the least understanding where you are and what you need to get done and all that. So I'm kind of vague on it now. We'll go into those details a little more as we go along. I think I really just want to move right into the next one, and that's just taking attendance, and that will move to Cheryl to find out who's all here and who's not. Cheryl?
Okay, thank you. This is Cheryl King. Let's do the conference bridge first. Bernard Aboba, Jim Coleman, Ronnie Cotton,
Good morning, Ronnie here.
Thank you. Sherry Farina, Tony Dunn.
Sherry's here.
Sherry, great. Greg Fields, Laura Flaherty, Kevin Green, Gunnar Hellstrom, Brad Hodges.
Good morning, Brad is here.
Rebecca Ledoux, Chris Littlewood, Paul Michaelis, Don Mitchell, Jim Nixon, Donna Platt, Richard Ray.
This is Richard. I'm here.
Thank you. Greg Schumacher, John Snap, Al Sonnenstrahl, Arnold Van Wyck.
Arnold is here.
Joel Zev.
Joel Zev is here.
All right, and in person, Angel Arocho, Brian Daly, Patrick Donovan, David Zumba, Mark Fletcher, Daniel Falk, Matt Gerst, Elliot Greenwald,
Here.
Marta Kinder, Cheryl King here. Brendan Casper. Bob Mathers here. Bruce McFarlane. Peter Musgrove. Neil McDermott is here for Marcy Roth of FEMA. Welcome, Neil. McDivitt, what did I say? McNeil? Neil McDivitt. Dwayne Sennett is here. Susan Sherwood is here. Karen Strauss will be in and out during the day. Mark Stern is here. Greg Vanderheiden. Christian Vogler. Norm Williams is here. Christian will be here late, okay? And we have Norm Williams. And is there anybody that I've missed? Anyone on the bridge or in the room that I've missed?
Sure.
Bernard Aboba.
Bernard is here now. Good, thank you.
Laura Ruby.
Laura.
Donna.
Donna is here. Good. Welcome, Donna. Anyone else? All right. Thank you for the attendance. Approval of the minutes?
Yeah, we'll see. Just keep going.
All right. On the subject of the minutes from the September meeting, I sent them out last week for your review. Are there any revisions, additions, or corrections to the minutes as drafted? No, hear no comments, so the minutes will be approved as written. Thank you very much. Okay. We have on the agenda then that we would turn to an FCC update. We do have some things to tell you about. Let's see, Elliot Greenwald, would you go first and tell us about the Advanced Communications Services report and order and further notice of proposed rulemaking?
Okay, on Friday, am I on the microphone on? Yeah, good. Okay, on Friday, the FCC released the Advanced Communication Services item just in advance of the October 8th CVAA deadline. Advanced Communication Services in the CVAA include 4 categories of services: interconnected VoIP, non-interconnected VoIP, electronic messaging, and interoperable video conferencing. Because those services are classified as interconnected VoIP as of the passage of the Act, are all covered by Section 255 of the Act. They are not covered by the Section 716 regulations. So that leaves, for coverage, interconnected VoIP and, non-interconnected VoIP and electronic messaging. Interoperable video conferencing was moved into the further notice for further comment as to the definition of interoperable and to develop standards as video conferencing services become interoperable. The covered entities include manufacturers of advanced communication services, including the software provided by the hardware manufacturers. It also includes providers of advanced communication services, including the software associated with the services that are provided. Independently provided software is not covered by the order. The order defines achievability in that consistent with the CVAA, in that the covered entities are required to provide accessibility only when achievable, and it also provides for industry flexibility in that the industry can either build in solutions or alternatively can provide third-party solutions. If neither built-in solutions nor third-party solutions at nominal cost are achievable, then covered entities are required to make their products and services accessible with peripheral devices, if that is achievable. There's also provisions for waiver for for services that are not when ACS is not a primary or co-primary part of the product or service. There's also an interim small business exemption consistent with the SBA definitions of small business that expires in 2 years, while the FCC takes further comment on whether there should be a permanent small business exemption and the definition of the categories. So that pretty much sums it up. I can answer any questions. Okay.
This is Cheryl. Thank you, Elliot. Patrick, would you like to tell us a little about the status of the NG 911 NPRM? And I think we have comment dates now, correct?
Yes, just yesterday. I'm on? Oh, there I am. Good morning, everyone. As you probably know, several weeks ago on September 22nd, we released our Next Generation 911 Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. This was a major step forward for the Commission on NG 911. Just to give you an idea of the attention that it's receiving, yesterday we did a webinar for NENA, and NENA was expecting about 50 or 60 people to attend the webinar, and we actually had over 600 people attend the webinar. I think it's a NENA record. That's what they were looking into it, but it seems as if it could be a record for them. So it's certainly got the attention that this issue deserves. The NPRM that we released last month is a follow-up to our December notice of inquiry that we released last December. And as you might remember, the notice of inquiry teed up every issue under the sun related to Next Generation 911. Earlier this year, we analyzed the comments that we received in response to the notice of inquiry, and we decided to have a more focused notice of proposed rulemaking that focused on text to 911 in particular, but then also other NG 911 applications as well. Our reason for focusing on text to 911 is that the record clearly demonstrated that there is an urgent need for people to be able to text to 911, and particularly people with disabilities. This was our primary reason for focusing on text in this notice of proposed rulemaking. And we began the notice of proposed rulemaking by reviewing the status of current and upcoming text to 911 trials, and sought comment on both the evolution of NG 911, both in the short term and long term. And we decided to break it up into two separate sections. We have a short term section and a long term section. As many of you have probably become aware, definitely throughout these meetings, is that true IP-based NG 911 solutions are a number of years away. But we can't wait a number of years for text to 911. So we decided to have a section that focuses on the short-term deployment of text to 911. I apologize. Our NPRM was 70 pages, so trying to boil it down to a 5-minute presentation is tough. So I took some notes here just to make sure I hit upon the key points. So we broke it up into short-term and long-term. In the short-term section, we discuss options, primarily SMS-based texting, but also software-based approaches as well. The NPRM discusses Intrado's SMS to 911 trials in Black Hawk County, Iowa, and Durham, North Carolina. And we also discuss Cassidian's completion of a simulation SMS to 911 trial in Harris County, Texas. The NPRM does note that SMS is not likely to be appropriate as a long-term solution for NG 911, given its number of limitations. For example, it does not support two-way real-time communication. It does not provide precise location information, and it does not support the delivery of other media, such as photos, video, and data. And there are other limitations as well that we are aware of. But at the same time, the NPRM makes it clear that SMS does have certain advantages as well. For example, SMS can be deployed relatively quickly. Consumers have already embraced the technology, and the vast majority of wireless providers and mobile devices already support SMS. So what we're looking for here in our comments is not necessarily another white paper on the limitations of SMS. We understand those limitations, and we certainly appreciate those limitations, and they'll factor into any decision that the FCC makes. But what we're looking for here is a discussion of whether the benefits of leveraging SMS to 911 on an interim basis outweigh the limitations of SMS to 911. And that's what we're really hoping to get at here. In the short-term section, we also seek comment on the feasibility of using 911-specific software-based applications as a short-term solution. This approach would have several potential benefits, including the fact that it could be rolled out in a short period of time and that it would not require any major network or handset upgrades. We seek comment on a number of questions related to the use of software-based applications for text to 911. We then change course before we get to the long-term section, and we seek comment on the ability of carriers to prioritize 911 traffic in major emergencies. The recent East Coast earthquake and Hurricane Irene demonstrated that concentrated demands on communications networks during and after major emergencies can hinder the ability of consumers to make voice calls, which can, of course, jeopardize consumers' ability to make a 911 call. We seek comment on how best to address this concern in both the legacy networks and in the future emerging broadband networks. So basically, we're seeking comment on whether carriers have the ability to prioritize 911 calls during and after major emergencies. We then move to the long-term deployment of NG 911. These long-term options can include IP-based technologies that are capable of delivering real-time text, photos, video, and other data to PSAPs. In the NPRM, we seek comment on the ongoing activities of standard-setting bodies and note 3 specific efforts: the NINA architecture based on IETF protocols, ADIS's efforts, and 3GPP's efforts. We also note that NINA has previously mentioned that NINA and 3GPP requirements must be aligned to make NG 911 available, and we therefore seek comment on whether an alignment is necessary, and if so, how much time is needed to effectuate such an alignment. In response to the December NOI, carriers generally argued, as I'm sure you've become aware, they've generally argued that SMS to 911 should not be part of the NG 911 framework, and that carriers should be given additional time to develop standards for IP-based emergency services. Well, as I previously mentioned, the Commission believes that deploying text to 911, that time is of the essence. And so in the NPRM, we seek comment on the specific time frames in which standards will likely be completed for real-time text and IP-based solutions. And we ask how much additional time will be needed for carriers to implement these solutions. We then have a section seeking comment on what role the FCC should play in expediting the deployment of text to 911 and other NG 911 applications, including both non-regulatory and regulatory measures. We begin by asking whether there are any incentive-based approaches that the FCC should adopt to encourage the rapid deployment of text to 911. The NPRM notes that even if carriers do upgrade their networks tomorrow, let's say, it wouldn't do any good if PSAPs were not able to receive the information. Thus, PSAPs will, of course, need certain equipment and operational procedures in place to receive text and other media types. The NPRM seeks comment on the degree to which PSAP readiness should be factored into commission action and whether it should be a precondition to FCC regulation of carriers in the NG 911 context. CISRIC, which is another FCC advisory committee, is about to start back up, I believe, next week. And a CISRIC committee that is chaired by Lori Flaherty and Brian Fonts of NENA will actually be exploring this on what level of PSAP readiness should occur before carriers are required to provide any sort of NG 911 functionality. As most of you know, our Phase 1 and Phase 2 wireless E911 rules required a PSAP to show that it is capable of receiving location information before a wireless carrier is obligated to provide a PSAP with location information. In the NPRM, we see comment on whether a similar process would be appropriate in the NG 911 context. And if so, what showing should a PSAP be required to make before it will show that it's ready? At the FCC, we do note that the deployment of E911 on a PSAP by PSAP basis had its limitations. And now with over 6,800 PSAPs, it would be very difficult for carriers to deploy NG 911 solutions on a PSAP by PSAP basis. For this reason, the NPRM asks whether we should assess PSAP readiness at the state or regional level and not necessarily at the PSAP level. We recognize that states and regional entities will play a significant role in the deployment of NG 911, and we ask how the FCC can leverage this fact. We also see comment on any legal or regulatory barriers that may exist at the state or local level that could hinder the deployment of NG 911. We are aware that there are a number of state and local regulations that currently hinder the deployment, and we ask what role the FCC can play to eliminate those outdated regulations. We are aware that certain of our regulations right now could hinder the deployment of NG 911, and we're looking into how best to eliminate those outdated regulations or modify those outdated regulations. Then finally, we have a section on managing consumer expectations. As we have discussed in here, the deployment of NG 911 won't be a flash cut. You will be able to text to 911 in certain parts of the country, but not in other parts of the country. How can the FCC manage consumer expectations, or how should expectations be managed overall? Not necessarily just from an FCC perspective, but overall. And then we also see comment on whether carriers should be required to provide a standardized response to someone who attempts to text to 911 in an area where text to 911 is not available. And I know I'm getting short on time, but probably most relevant for what we're talking about today, we have a section on the overlap between this proceeding and also what the EAAC is doing, or what we're doing here, and whether we should incorporate the EAAC's recommendations into this proceeding. So thank you for your time. And it was a big NPRM of 70 pages. And just yesterday, it was published in the Federal Register. And so comments will be due on December 12th of this year. And reply comments will be due on January 10th of 2012. Thanks.
This is Cheryl King. Thank you, Patrick, for that overview. It's really helpful. And also, on the note of the relationship between the NG 911 and the EAAC, we have suggested to our Office of General Counsel that we clearly define the EAAC's relationship in terms of ex parte rules, and it has been proposed that we exempt the EAAC from the ex parte rules to make it easier for our deliberations, etc. And so I should have something on that in the next few days, and then we'll have that clarified. Are there any questions on any of the FCC items? We're very busy. Bob, did you have something?
Microphone. Camera to Bob. This is Bob speaking. I would like to know about the authorization for the NG 911 announcement that was made under the, whether it be the FCC and or the CVAA.
The authorization, meaning?
Rather, the authorization for the notice of the public rulemaking, is it under the CVAA?
Oh.
What is the, that's the intent of my question. Is it a separate authorization for the CVAA for these rules? For example, FCC making recommendations regarding the CVAA and also asking the FCC to announce the rules under the CVAA, rather, as related to your NPRM, as you recently announced.
Yeah, this proceeding, actually, it began last year. This is an FCC proceeding separate from the CVAA. We do have a section at the end of our NPRM discussing the Commission's authority on this front, and we do cite to the CVAA. However, this proceeding is separate from the CVAA.
Thank you.
We primarily rely on our jurisdiction under the 911 Act.
Move into the next item on the agenda.
Thank you, Patrick. Wow, a lot to that. So, all right, we're going to now change kind of directions and get into the recommendations and report. And we have on our morning agenda, we have, excuse me, sorry. We have some discussions with some of the sections from the policy committee, and then we'll talk about sections 6, 8, and 10 from the technical subcommittees. I think just before we get started, I just kind of wanted to let everyone know that we have, as a coordination committee, a first draft that we are looking at based on a lot of the input from the subcommittee. So just want to say thank you for getting your portions done on time, and we have something that we're at least looking at, and there's things we're doing in terms of just going through the document lightly. We're not making any substance changes or anything in there, so didn't want anybody to get excited that we're rewriting sections. We're just kind of putting it all together based on the outline that we kind of started with at the beginning of the EAAC. So just let you know we have that. So I want to turn the attention now over to the policy subcommittee, excuse me, and talk about sections 5, 7, and 11 of the recommendations and report. And I'm not sure who's taking that lead on that. Angel?
This is Cheryl. Yes, and thank you. We just wanted to bring attention to these sections, and if you could just give us an overview of the work of the subcommittee for those sections, that's what we're looking for in this part of the agenda. Angel?
Thanks, Cheryl. Regarding, I guess, chapters 5, 7, and 11, the subcommittee has gone through those 3 chapters. We have come up with our drafts, our working drafts for those 3 sections, and they have been posted on the wiki, and obviously available to the whole EAAC and also for the coordination team to begin looking at the content that's in there. As far as our timelines, you know, the sections were completed within the timelines that we wanted to submit our final drafts to the EAAC co-chairs. So they've been out there, I want to say, for at least 1 or 2 weeks for public consumption. So I'm not sure if the coordination team has begun the process to put it in that format, but we can certainly do that. I know internally from a subcommittee perspective, from those 3 chapters, the chapter 5 on the user requirements, we did have to go back to it a couple of times because we wanted it to align with the functional requirements, chapter 7. So if we have some time as we work through the recommendations, chapter 12, we would certainly want to do potentially provide more feedback, but we know that that we'll have the opportunity from an overall perspective to provide additional feedback to it as well. We just wanted to make sure that our content that we have worked to date was made available up to the in line with our deadline. So, and I don't know if Bob has anything else to add.
Thank you. Then we can turn to the technical subcommittee's discussion of the work that has gone on for the sections 6, 8, and 10. The material has been submitted. Norm, do you have anything that you would like to report on those efforts? Oh, Christian just got here, huh?
Testing, okay. Yeah, Christian just arrived, so I suggest if we could just wait a moment or two for him to get settled. We need to make sure the TV's on, Norm, so that I can see what's being said outside. Could you repeat what you just said, please? I was just telling them, they're asking for the technical subcommittee report, and I was just telling them that you have just arrived, so. This is Christian, okay. First, let me apologize for being late. The red line on the Metro today has been kind of a mess. The whole Metro has been quite slow, and it took me more time than expected to get here. So I have been told that there was the report on the technical subcommittee activity. Is that what you wanted, a rundown of that?
This is Cheryl. Yes, Christian. We were just on the agenda. We had an opportunity for a discussion of the subcommittees for their sections in the report area. That were developed and then submitted to the coordination group so that the subcommittees could then turn to the recommendations, which will take up the rest of our day. But wanted to give the opportunity to give an overview to the full EAAC on the technical subcommittee's work to date.
Okay. Until a week ago, the subcommittee had been primarily focused on finishing up Chapters 8. And Chapter 8 required a lot of work and a lot more content than expected in the beginning of our work. So we had collected various technical specs and information and some recommendations of what needed to happen in regards to technology. We also recently submitted everything last week to the coordinating committee. And we had decided to not go with Chapter 10. Chapter 10 was, well, it became obligations and impacts for different entities and the technical perspectives. But there was a lot of content related to that within Chapter 8. So we didn't want to have to recreate what we had already said in Chapter 8 and Chapter 10. We wanted to avoid duplication of effort, so we decided to eliminate Chapter 10. And instead, we thought it would be helpful to figure out what obligations are from a much higher point of view from what the technical committee can provide. So Bob Mather and I talked about coming together to come up with a clear list from a variety of perspectives from the different entities and their obligations, and put that up for discussion last week. And I believe that was covering both policy and technical, right, Bob? And Bob says yes. So far we've gotten just one comment from Bernard within that subcommittee, but we haven't had a real chance to discuss that and flesh that out in full. And the idea right now is to make sure that we are on the same page as far as standards and make sure that all of the approaches are covered. So that's currently up for discussion, and that's what we want for Chapter 12 are the technical recommendations. Also, since last week, we've been working on the recommendations for 12 Part B, and this is a slow process. There's been a lot of disagreements within the subcommittee, and one of the main disagreements is about scope of standards. The industry representatives have pointed out that there are a lot of things that the standards work from I3, focusing on open networking that could apply to IMS. So we just haven't found a way to come to an agreement to put some specs in to be specific with open networking, and that would eventually recognize the ongoing work within IMS to make sure that we're making everything accessible.
Also, any questions? Okay, this is David. Those are real quick. So what we're going to do is I'd like to just talk a little bit about the process. I think there's been a lot of questions asked about the document at a point when we have a first draft and we're out at the whole EAAC and how changes are going to be made and all that. So I'm going to attempt to start, and I'm going to look to the other coordination committee members that I see around the table and are online to kind of jump in and let's add through some of the stuff. So first of all, I just wanted to let you know that we, as a coordination committee, we have a first draft that we have put together. It's 111 pages, just FYI, and we're just received it this week, and we're just kind of going through the first steps. The next thing I wanted to talk about is I just wanted to recognize, and maybe I should do this first, is Dwayne Sennett, who's here. So if he can just raise his hand real quick. He is the editor-in-chief, I would say, or whatever, on the document. And just a couple of real quick process things to everyone to know is that no one writes them other than the coordination committee. So if you have changes, you go through the coordination committee and not directly to Dwayne. And then within the coordination committee, it is Cheryl who is sending information directly to Dwayne. It says, change this to this. So I just kind of want to get the first process of it. I didn't want to overwhelm Dwayne with numerous change requests, but I wanted to just kind of get through the process started with everyone. So Dwayne is making the changes. The direction that Dwayne gets is from the coordination committee. Primarily, that's coming from Cheryl directly to Dwayne. And then we'll go from there. So just wanted to just go through step one. And just remind everyone, please do not write Dwayne. I think I've said that, right, Dwayne, at least 3 or 4 times. I think that was what you wanted. Yeah. Put this in right. But so just a couple quick start. Just how to start the high level of the process. We have the first draft that we are now going through, and a couple of things that we're looking at was one, we're not changing the content of what's been submitted from the subcommittee. So we're not rewriting sections or doing that stuff. We're just organizing the information. We're seeing things that maybe it needs to flow a little differently. There are some conflicts of things in there. There are just kind of make sure it looks kind of readable before we send it out to the full EAAC. I think I'm going to stop right here for just a quick second to see if anybody on the coordination committee had any additional details, at least to this process point, that they wanted to bring up.
This is Greg Vanderheiden. Yeah, there was some concern, I know, and I think you covered it well, that people needed to stop sending comments to the working groups, and they should send them all to the coordinator or the editor or something to get them in, because the coordinating group was doing editing and things. And so I think it's good to focus on the fact that the coordinating group is trying to coordinate, and that everything that's also being done, even the movement around, is all going immediately back out as soon as it gets pulled together to the full group. So there was also a little exchange of emails at one point about, that once it went to the coordination group, it had now been lost to the committee members, and they didn't think it was finished yet. So I think the important part is that it's pulling it all together, and it's going immediately back out as soon as it's finished, and we have all the pieces, although there's lots of pieces, to the group, so everybody can then comment again. So nothing has left the committee's hands. Thank you.
Thank you. So this is David, so thank you. So just now we'll go to the next part. I'm just going to try to get through this a little bit, and again, I think contributions from anyone on ideas or suggestions, or if it's not clear, let's try to make sure we understand how we're kind of running through this stuff. So we did not send it. We are not sending it. Oh, sorry. Maybe you ask, Elle has a question on the first part. Elle?
This is Al from CSD, and I do have some concerns. I certainly appreciate everyone's input and involvement and effort to make everything accessible. And we have a lot of variety of people here from different backgrounds and different interests. Some representing industry. We have some people representing consumer groups, for example, the deaf community. And we have a variety of other disability communities being represented. And as you know, we have to be deaf to understand some things. And we have a lot of people who are hearing here on the committee, and I don't mean to be offensive to anyone, and I appreciate everyone's effort on the committee. But there's still a lot of things that are being overlooked, oversights that are coming up through the process, and I see a lot of things that are missing. Like Greg's comment just mentioned how deaf people have submitted some questions and ideas, and often there are pieces that are missing. And I don't know if that's because the people who are involved that are hearing don't understand what they're talking about. So I just wanted to raise that I do have some concerns, and I hope that we can have some time once we receive comments and things are ready to let deaf community members review what the final product looks like. Because remember, we don't have staff. I know that many of you do have staff. Most of us consumer group are volunteer folks who are volunteering our time to be here during the nights and on weekends. And for example, I'm retired, and I am trying to retire because I'm here as a volunteer. So it is difficult on us. So I'm asking for some allotted time where we could take a look at the comments that are there and make sure that we have a moment to review and express our concerns.
Christian?
This is Christian. I would like, first we need the camera on Christian. Okay. I would like to add to what Al just mentioned. I think that some of things what you said I do agree with. It's important, and also sometimes, well, again, I don't want to insult anybody here as well, but it is difficult for people to understand what it means to be deaf. And so I do agree with that, but I also want to add my concern about other disability groups as well, because a lot of times on this committee we have strong deaf representation, and I am worried that we may be inadvertently overlooking the perspective of other people with disabilities, especially people with cognitive disabilities, speech disabilities, people who are deaf, blind, and people who are blind. So we haven't had their input as much, and that's a concern.
This is Cheryl. Thank you, Christian. This is Cheryl King. Yes, the issues of NG 911 and texting and video to 911 are issues that are certainly at the forefront of issues of concern to the deaf and hard of hearing communities. We do have Rebecca Ledoux, who is the East Coast representative of speech communication by telephone, and she has been very active through email and other means, and I think she attended the ADIS meeting yesterday, and she is a leader in the speech disability community, and so we're very thankful that we have her valuable input. She does not travel to all of these meetings, and so we don't have a lot of FaceTime with Rebecca, but she's out there, and I expect she's on the phone or on the bridge now. But she is emailing when she has a question, so she's participating in, to the degree that that she is able to, without us having funds to provide transportation from Baltimore for Rebecca. But she is very involved, again, through the email, and I know that she's had ongoing collaborations with a number of the subcommittees, and I guarantee you she's watching everything. I send her hard copies of all the material that we have presented, whether they're PowerPoints or whatever. And so we certainly appreciate her representation of the speech disability community. We have Brad Hodges from the American Foundation of the Blind, who is our one blind person on the EAAC, and we are appreciative of his being available to keep us on our toes for issues of interest and concern to the vision disability community.
Cheryl, this is Brad Hodges. Could I?
Brad, sure. Come on in, Brad.
I hope I'm okay with my audio. I'm having a little IP issue today. I just wanted to express our appreciation, of course, being included organizationally at AFB, American Foundation for the Blind, and also just to alleviate anyone's concerns that the interests of deaf and of deaf-blind people and blind people are being adequately represented. They are. We monitor with care and in detail these activities and process, and to date we are very pleased with the process itself as well as the results that it's producing.
This is Cheryl King. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
And then further, Christian, to your concern about the cognitive disability community, we don't have a consumer representative on the EAAC from that community, and we are all responsible for making sure that issues that would be of interest and concern to that community are observed, and hopefully that we can sit in their place, and if we need to call them in to review the material, we certainly have that opportunity. We could call in additional subject matter experts, similar to what we did with the survey. We were approached, and we developed an easy-to-read version of the survey. Back to the issues of the NG 911 with real-time text and video to the peace apps are two of the main issues, and certainly the deaf and hard of hearing community is very up and responsible and responsive to those issues. Did you have some follow-up, Christian?
Just a brief comment. So I appreciate your comments and your response, and I wanted to add that I know that everyone meant well and means well, but I think in terms of we don't have cognitive disabilities. So again, we really need to be in touch with the constituents that have that particular disability. I think there's things that they'll think of that we won't be able to think of that are very valuable.
Al? I did want to mention the deaf-blind community is one that we're, also very receptive to issues of. Go ahead, Al.
Yeah, this is Al. That's what I was about to say. I was just going to mention that the deaf-blind community, I wanted to mention them too. For example, talking about removing TTYs, that discussion had come up, and I don't know that, maybe we wouldn't have thought of that. I mean, I know from the deaf community's perspective, they are kind of outdated and they're not really used much anymore, but then you talk to deaf-blind people and they certainly are very necessary to that population of people, and I don't know that we would have necessarily thought of that ourselves. So we're very, very, I think it's important to be very, very conscious in watching out for particular issues within other communities. So again, often you have to be deaf to understand what's really needed in the deaf community, and likewise you have to be deaf-blind to understand what's really needed with that community as well. So that's why I asked for the time to be able to review and make sure that everything's covered, that there haven't been any oversights. No one's perfect, certainly, but we would like to minimize the oversights as much as possible.
This is David. We have two comments. I have Donna and then Joel. So Donna.
Okay. This is Donna speaking. I just wanted to add a comment to Al as well. Now, over the past few months, I have talked with several people from, just different states, and, they've given me some information that also, yes, many deaf people are still using the TTY because, I mean, they're really just poor. They just can't afford the internet service. Their economic status doesn't allow for that. They don't have phone service or anything. So there are many deaf TTY users out there still, and we really need to, look at that too.
Thank you, Donna. Joel?
Yes, thank you. I want to be careful. I think we're getting a little parochial in terms of each disability be represented. I know I've been speaking out a number of times on issues of people who are older who become deaf, become blind, and someone who's deaf may also have additional disabilities, cognitive disabilities, vision impairments, and as they get older will also develop additional disabilities. So I think we all have to look at it from less focus on each individual disability and remember the tremendous number of people out there who are disabled among senior citizens, but also the unique needs of each of the disabilities. Is not because you're blind doesn't mean you cannot be something else also. And because you're deaf doesn't mean you cannot be something else also. And I think we, from all of our expertise and experience, I think we're bringing to the table a tremendous amount of input and potential input that we need to keep going on and not just focus on one disability or another disability, but issues of people with disabilities in the broader sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Any other questions, comments right now? All right. So I'm going to continue on with the process here, and that was kind of the first step. So just to reiterate, we have a draft with the coordination committee. So I think people want to know when they're going to see it. So the comments at least I hear is that there needs to be the opportunity at a point that it goes back out to the EAAC as a whole to look at it, and that is part of the process. So getting into the next step, when we're completed from the coordination committee, it will be distributed back to the full EAAC. And I think I should say when. I'm going to put some dates here because I think we talked.
The recommendations are due to us October 28th.
Right. So the recommendations are due October 28th. On October 31st, we, as the coordination committee, have committed to, I'll say, a full day of an editing session where we're going to go through the document on the 31st, and we may change some flow and do some things in there just to make the document readable and organize some of the information. Again, we're not looking to change the content of the submittals, so what has been submitted will be there. After that, we'll need a little time to Dwayne to go up and make these modifications, and the plan is by around the 4th of November to have the first version of review of the EAAC recommendations and report document to the full EAAC. So just again, the recommendations, input, and the contributions from the subcommittees are due by the 28th. The 31st, the coordination committee will spend a day online going through the document and making what changes we believe need to be made for the document. November 4th, around there, should get the first copy of the EAAC document. So that's going to be the step that's going to kick off the reviews that are needed by the different subcommittees. There may be some things in the subcommittees that are still talking about that may need some updates. There may be some things individually contributed through the outreach efforts from the different organizations that will want to start coming in. So the 4th, you'll get it, and then I don't think we have a date that says you have like 1 week to get it in there. Probably the next major milestone is going to be the November 18th EAAC meeting. So at that point, I think we're hoping to have comments, approval, pretty much the document locked down to a point where we're, I'll say, satisfied. I'm not sure what the right word is for that of it. Now saying that, I know that monitoring and following a lot of the discussions in the subcommittees, there are a lot of areas that there's just not agreement in. And part of the things we talked about at the very first EAAC meeting is that there can be parallel recommendations, or I'll use some words from the TITAC type activities, minority reports. So at least what I see right now in the recommendations, it seems like there may be a couple of recommendations. There could be maybe 2, 3, I don't know, maybe more. There could be, in theory, one from the PSAPs that have a specific issue, the whole infrastructure for the network, and then from the consumer side. I don't know, but one of the things we did talk about at the beginning is that there is room in here to have parallel recommendations. So I didn't want to come up there and say that if we can't get agreement in the section that we have to come up with agreement, but the idea would be we come up with some consensus on a majority of this document. And I do think there's areas, at least I hope in the section 1 where we talk about purpose and scope and all that, that we can at least, I'll start with the easy one here and say, I think we can probably come up with agreement with that and lock that down pretty quickly. As we get into some of the other sections that are just much more difficult, and that's again just watching what's going on, there is a way that can have parallel recommendations, or I'll use the word again, minority reports. So I didn't want to come up and say if we can't get agreement on a chapter that we're just never going to submit something, but I think the purpose is to collect those recommendations and have them as part of the package that goes in there. So I think that was the next thing I wanted to do, and I'm going to stop right there again and ask if there's any other clarification or comments from the coordination committee, and then throw it out to the whole EAAC on that to make sure we're kind of very clear for everyone on how that next phase of the process works.
This is Cheryl King. Thank you, David. Yes, we certainly hope that we can have a consensus report because that will be more productive for the process and move us forward. But certainly we don't want any knockdown, drag-out fights, and we can have unresolved issues or unagreed upon strategies so that we can comply with our mandate from Congress to submit recommendations to the Commission on December the 7th. Anyone else?
Sherry has a comment, and then L, and then Brian. Go ahead, Sherry.
Yes, hi. If we don't come to an agreement, then what's the purpose of submitting recommendations? The FCC are we going to let up to the FCC to decide which they prefer? Are they going to pick one, or I'm not sure about the parallel recommendations.
Let the FCC answer that.
This is Cheryl King again. The EAAC is charged with making recommendations to the Commission. As we proceed, the work in the subcommittees, people are working hard to see other points of view and come to consensus on recommendations, and I'm confident that we will have recommendations that can be submitted. If there are issues that are unresolved, it could be, we could consider putting them in an appendix or a follow-up section and calling out the rationale for the disparate positions, but we certainly are confident that the EAAC can submit recommendations to the Commission on December the 7th. Go ahead.
We have L.
Yeah, you have a lot more confidence than I do, I guess.
This is just Dave. We'll just have to, as we go through the review with them, I think things should clarify as the document gets submitted, and see kind of the areas that we have strong agreement on and can close up, and then the areas that we have some discussion, we're just going to have to just put those on the table and absolutely discuss those. I have L, next Brian, and then Lori.
I have two questions. It's interesting. I was about to raise one question, but Sherry kind of beat me to the punch on that one. So, you mentioned, well, Cheryl mentioned that if someone is still in opposition, that it wouldn't be mentioned in the recommendation, that it could be possibly placed in an appendix. If so, then what is the process to follow up on that appendix and to get printed in the appendix? I guess that's my first question. I have a second question that I will ask after you answer the first question. So what is the process to place opposition or opposing points of view in the appendix?
This is Cheryl King. It was suggested that we have a vehicle to memorialize the unresolved issues and repeat the positions of the disagreeing parties if there are some of those kinds of issues as we complete the process. We are chartered for 2 years. We, the committee, could determine that we will address those unresolved issues next year. That's totally, a possibility. Or other activities. Go ahead.
I had a follow-up question to that question.
Thank you. My second question, well, first I'd like to say I really appreciate Dwayne's involvement and as editor involved in this. And I'm just curious, does Dwayne have a background in the issues of what we've been talking about? Does he have any idea about orientation on the issues that we've been talking about? And if not, for example, VRS and so forth, does he need some kind of training or an orientation or work with somebody from DRO, the Disability Rights Office, to make sure that everything kind of flows well in our reports for our needs?
This is Cheryl King. Dwayne Sennett is the editor in terms of being the pen, being the staff person that is putting it together. He will be making no independent editing other than, correcting punctuation perhaps, but even those will be viewed by all of us. What the subcommittees submit to the coordination committee, then we give to Dwayne, and he's the word processor.
This is David. I'll jump in. So he's going to basically, we'll say change this to that, and Dwayne will change this to that in there. Again, he'll have a little freedom for grammar. If we kind of just submit something that just has a word that's just misspelled, I would hope that he, at least have the authority to correct those things on us, and at least make us look better. So yeah, he's not making any unilateral changes to the document at all based on maybe just independent ideas. So everything comes through the coordination committee, will be changed and vetted through the EAAC. Is it that answer, I think, Al, pretty much? Okay.
I certainly understand. I just was curious as to whether or not if you have somebody with some experience, then you can avoid unnecessary confusion, even if it's at the semantic level. When we talk about deaf-blind people, a lot of times people assume that they're deaf and blind people. And just having some kind of separation that says that we have a person who has two of those specific disabilities and one person a deaf-blind person. And that can just avoid kind of unnecessary confusion.
No, thanks. All those are good points, and we'll expect you'll catch us if there's errors in there. I'd like to move over to Brian, and then Lori, we have you up next. Brian?
Thank you, David. With the mic's on. Thank you, David. Oh, there we go. First, I'd like to address Brian Daly, AT&T. First, I would like to address what you mentioned as the minority viewpoints in the report, and it's certainly understandable that there will be a number of different views that need to be reflected and documented. As we look at the CVAA, it suggests that the EAAC take input from different interest groups. I'll call them, for lack of a better term. perhaps one way to approach it is where there is different viewpoints in the different interest groups, make note of that input from those different interest groups, and as Cheryl mentioned, a good way maybe to try to resolve any differences at future EAAC meetings next year, but at least capture them in this initial version of the document. The question I had, though, was with regard to the process, and I thank you for clarifying that. We have a task before us before the 28th on coming to consensus, or at least as much of a consensus viewpoint as we can. And I spoke with Greg earlier this morning on how we could perhaps work together and try to achieve that in a quick manner. When the document comes out on the 4th of November, we have 2 weeks before the 18th, which is when we're going to try to pull everything together. I would suggest we put a rather rigid process in place between the 4th and 18th for reviews, comments, and a final version of the document that can at least be reviewed a couple of days before the 18th, so that we're in a good understanding of what's being looked at on the 18th. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that'll be very key. Then just to let you know, after the 18th, we still have a little bit of opportunity. I know holiday comes in there and stuff till the 7th. Obviously, we don't want to be editing on the 7th because there's a chance for errors. But no, I actually like that for the 14th. We'll talk about that at the coordination committee. Just for everyone's information, we do meet as a coordination committee every Wednesday, and we talk about the process and different things and stuff. So this kind of input is excellent for that. Lori, you're next.
Good morning, and thank you. There are a number of us on this advisory group that have been on FCC advisory groups in the past, and perhaps the process for resolving differences in terms of the report may not be exactly the same, but we can certainly apply what we know from past advisory groups to this one. And in terms of conflicting opinions, I'm assuming, but I would encourage the subgroups to make the coordinating group aware of those on the weekly calls, because there may be ways to resolve those differences on the part of either the co-chairs or the DFO, or just active involvement of folks other than those in the subgroup. Speaking from past experience, sometimes we have come to somewhat of an impasse, and it has been helpful to bring some fresh eyes into the process, either with regard to the content or the process itself. So I'm sure you guys are already hearing in the coordinating group what some of the conflicting opinions may be, but I would encourage, having been a subgroup chair, I would encourage those that are to bring those forward, because the direction of the co-chairs and the DFO have been extremely useful to me in that regard. Thank you.
This is David. Thank you, Lori. That's a really good point, actually. So I think the action to be on the subcommittee co-chairs, if there are areas that you're already aware of that may not be agreeable. I don't know the right word to say, but let's just go ahead and bring those to the forefront to the coordination committee. Greg, you have a couple of comments?
Yeah, one of the things, once we hit the 4th and the full document comes out, my experience in other committees also is that many people, that's the first time they ever read it. And so we're likely to get a full board NPRM response to it, meaning that in the next 2 weeks you could get on the order of 10,000 pages of cumulative of people, each different group, each different organization, each different entity taking a copy and going through and marking it up and sending them in. So again, I would like to suggest that we do something like asking people to get together and pool their comments. And if we have a committee that gets set up that's sort of trying to negotiate the tough topics, that people try to send the comments into that group that has, and so we have the working groups now doing that kind of a thing. And if there's any tiger teams on particular aspects, for example, that are known to be contentious, that we identify them and people try and send their comments in there. Because if you have a group get together and finally hammer something out, and then everybody then just comes in after the fact with more edits, I just don't see how we're going to reach closure. So again, if we can, maybe on our homepage of the wiki or something, we should be identifying topics and places to direct them to, or if there's a team working on a particular area, to try and focus it in, so we see if we can't do this. There's an awful lot on the table for the time we got left. Thanks.
This is David. Yeah, absolutely. I didn't think about 10,000 more pages. Now I'm really scared, but that brings a whole other process into play, and maybe we drop our other jobs for a couple of weeks. I don't know if there's any other comments on anything right now that we've kind of heard that you want to add into. I need to think. We're gonna. If there aren't, I'd like to probably recommend that we kind of adjourn, and I wouldn't mind talking to the coordination committee for just a brief minute. Lunch is not here, but I don't think it matters to anyone if they just take a little bit of break and doing that. So is there any reason we don't want to take a break now? Or is there additional things that we need to discuss from a process standpoint? I think we kind of went so far into it, but I think after the 4th is we need to kind of make sure we iron down a little bit more of how we're going to handle that. You're right, everybody's going to see that for the first time. There's going to be hundreds and thousands of comments individually and collectively. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, there's been some discussion among people who've been on committees before about how to try to handle this.
Yeah.
And I know how in other standards groups we handle it is we put out the one doc, and then everybody says, on this paragraph it says this, and each one of them is a separate comment. But again, if people, as we've seen, have something to say about almost every one, and there's 10 commenters, you'd end up with 10 versions of the entire document with some edit on, say, half of the items. And so if anybody has any idea, I know how to do it normally in standards groups, but we usually take a year or so to do that. If we're trying to do it in 2 weeks, if anybody has any ideas how to handle 10 different versions that have a comment on almost or even half of the provisions, that's going to be where we're at. So again, pooling has got to be some kind of thing.
No, that's a great one. I have Mark, L, and then Brian. So I think there's let's continue with this discussion.
Mark Fletcher from Avaya. Mark Fletcher from Avaya. In the NINA work groups that I participate in, we use an online web-based tool that collects the individual comments from people, either in a document form or individual line by line. The draft documents are all line numbered, so someone can easily say, I'd like to change the wording in line 27 to be this. And then the document manager controls that list of changes. And it does take a little time, but it is manageable, and all the changes do get tracked and resolved. And it also allows, I think importantly, it allows for people outside the committees to send in comments about the document, and the tool actually provides a way to respond to those people that have submitted comments so they know what the outcome of their comments were, which I think is important as well. I could investigate what tool they use if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Okay, thanks.
I have L, then Brian, and then Sherry. L?
This is Al from CSD, And I agree with Mark. I would recommend that we definitely don't touch the different document. We don't want to touch the document, but we could use the wiki to allow for comments, and then that way comments can be made on the wiki in the document going online instead of us doing it. And then we can look at our coordinating group, can look at those comments and go through and try to separate, like for example, if I have a question and I raise that question about a particular issue within the document, it may have already been answered within another chapter. So the question could then be left, and then anything that should be included can then, those things can be left there for clarification.
Thank you. Brian?
Brian Daly, AT&T. Yeah, I think this is very important that we do establish a process, and this tool sounds interesting if one can be established before the timelines we
He's
have.
out checking right now.
Yeah, good. You know, other things we have done are as simply as have a stable document with the line numbers, and each reviewer creates a spreadsheet with line X, here's my recommended change, line, you know, and just document it in a spreadsheet, and then go through each of the comments that way. The other comment I was going to make with regard to the timelines, the coordination group may want to consider if there are more stable sections of the document, if those could be released earlier so that those can be put out of the way before some of the more contentious issues like the technical recommendations and so forth. That may be a consideration as well. Thank you.
This is this is how.
Wait, hold on. I gotta just get Sherry's
sure.
queued up. I wanted to make sure.
I just wanted
Sherry
to
and then-
respond to his
go ahead,
comment
Al.
real quickly, if I could.
Al and then Sherry.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that you have a good point, Brian. But suppose, well, you were talking about separating out some of the more solid pieces. If we have a coordinator for each chapter, but what if an issue that's raised, but it's maybe perhaps in the wrong chapter? It should have belonged to another chapter. How would something like that be handled?
This is Cheryl King. We have been pushing things back down to the subcommittees. So what the subcommittees send to the coordination group should be a final product. And so there should not be massive edits of the document when it goes back out, because you all have created the sections. The coordination committee is just putting them together, and then looking at the document as a whole, we may be able to recognize duplications, inconsistencies with other sections, and then if we need to consult back with the subcommittees to resolve any of those apparent inconsistencies, then that we will do. But again, as I have been trying to assert the power back down to the subcommittees, you all work it out, and what you submit to us goes in the document. And when the full document in a draft form is sent out to the EAAC, then the technical subcommittee will be able to see the policy subcommittee's work as the coordination group has merged and integrated them. Go ahead.
Sherry, and then I think Greg.
Yes, this is Sherry. Well, I don't think that that some of us understand regarding when it's passed for each chapter. I don't think that we have that clear understanding. And the fact that Bob and I both thought that when we clean it up, that we have another opportunity to add any comments. And they said, no, we don't. You all have mentioned and said that. No, we don't have that opportunity to do it again. And then it goes back. Well, then, secondly, I think for clarification that to use the decision to have consistency within the decisions that industry has their responsibility or their perspective view. So it means that we're supposed to go ahead with the majority report, because that's not clear to me about industry doesn't want to work with us.
This is Cheryl King. Sherry, to the first part of your comment, we wanted the subcommittees to complete the sections and then send them in, and then not keep changing them again every few days. We wanted a static document that we can put together. Once we got the various sections, for instance, the policy committee, subcommittee worked on sections 5, 7, and 11. We needed to have a submittal so that it can go into the document so that we will have a baseline document. When that baseline document is prepared, it will come back out to the EAAC, and then comments can be provided. But we certainly don't hope, we hope that there will not be rewriting at that level of review in the process. Go ahead.
I don't know if you had a comment. Go ahead, Greg.
This is Greg. Again, the tools that we talked about before and the line item, these are both what we were talking about before as the standard practices, and these are really excellent, because the worst thing is when someone says, well, in this section it talks about X, and so having the line references is really good so people can find what it is. Or with the other tools, you actually excerpt the language and you put it in. This is really helpful because as you're going along, you may get comments on a draft that's different than the draft that, if you ever do make any changes. And if you don't make any changes, then what happens is somebody points out an error and you change it, and then everybody's still making all their comments on the old language, and so the new language actually nobody sees, and so when you're done they say, well, that's not what you gave us to review. So you actually have to go rounds. We can't just do it in one round and in 2 weeks. How do you do multiple rounds when you want to give them 2 weeks to review it? So other than having people sit down and figure out some common language, I'm not sure that in a comment resolution, send back out for comment, get resolution, send back out for comment. And this is the way these things normally are done when you do comments on a formal document. If you want 2 weeks per round, we're dead, because basically everybody puts their comments in, then some bodies are going to have to sit down, pick the final language, and nobody gets to refute the final language or even comment on it. So that's the concern I see if we just aren't in a situation to use any of the normal procedures that I know of for trying to come to consensus given the timelines we have. So I would like to suggest the only way we're going to get to the end, I believe, is to to have everybody look and think about not only what it is that they are trying to achieve, but try to find out what the language they're having trouble with, what it was trying to achieve. And if we can try and get together people who can try and find language that tries to find the best balance and put that forward. But we are going to have to, I think, all be trying to look at everybody's point of view and all of the major issues. And that's what we talked about earlier. If people can identify what the issues are instead of just what the words are, then we can, sometimes people try to fix something and they don't fix it because they don't understand what the problem was in the first place. So I guess this is a call to all of us to try to find the common ground rather than try to just find words, try and figure out what the issues behind them are. Thanks.
Angel, I believe you had a comment.
Angel with Comcast. I just wanted to add, and I think Cheryl touched on it a little bit in her earlier comments, especially for the folks that are within one of the subcommittees. With the work that we've been doing, we really haven't had a chance to focus on the activity from the other subcommittees. So, you know, we'll be coming in blind into that content. They're obviously still working on it. So, in some cases, you know, you might receive a lot of comments once we have the final product, because that might be the first time that we're looking at that portion of the content, maybe not the overall document.
That is good. Yeah, probably on the 4th, it could be the first time some people have seen certain sections, especially if you've been really grinding in on the sections you've been working on. So I'm hoping those subcommittees have done a pretty good job of at least taking in those comments, because people are on different ones.
And they're on the wiki.
Yeah, but even on the wiki, I mean, I have to admit, even when I've been on subcommittees, you're so focused on the one, you never look at the other one until it's time to look at it, because there's just not enough time in the day to look at everybody's stuff. So, yeah, it's going to be, yes, I think there's I have Sherry who wants to make a comment, and then Bob.
Okay, hi, this is Sherry. Yes, I was wondering to tie up regarding to a recommendation, to make the recommendation, the reality is requires funding. And I'm wondering if we make our point for every recommendation, they need to say the funding must be available to make the recommendation happen. That was said over and over again for every recommendation. So gets the bright point. So the FCC themselves see it as an issue that needs access. And the apps for changing, for making it happen, requires funding. And is that possible?
This is David. I think in the questions we ask about feasibility and all there, I can't say I know. I think some of the subcommittees have been hitting on some of those areas, and there's no doubt about it. You need money for certain things, or a lot of things.
Yes, but this is Sherry. But it's necessary for every recommendation.
This is Cheryl King. Yes, we have discussed and recognized that funding for an NG 911 transformation is very important. One of the issues in the FCC's NPRM on NG 911 is funding, the cost-benefit analysis, and so there are groups that are looking at that in a more specific fashion than we certainly are, and Congress charged us with developing recommendations for effective and efficient next generation 911 emergency services for people with disabilities and seniors. Go ahead.
I think Bob had wanted to make some comments. Bob?
Hello, there's another issue. Is there a way to address the different opinions on different issues? It's important that we have a consensus or an agreement to disagree, that there is as much discussion within the different chapters in addressing these different issues, the pros and cons, and the different perspectives, and as much as possible, and to include in these chapters the concerns that we're not focusing on in Chapter 12, for example, but they may also be in other chapters. So the co-chairs will be able to include the different perspectives on within the varying chapters.
This is David. The short answer would be yes. I think that's what we're sort of talking about. I used the word minority reports or differing recommendations. You know, again, that was one of the things we talked about initially. There could be some differences, and we want to make sure those are brought forward. Again, if you can get any kind of consensus in the document to the best possible way, that's obviously the preferred way. But we do recognize and have seen through some of the monitoring of the subcommittees, there are areas that probably are going to agree to disagree and need different recommendations. So if you know those now in the subcommittees, you might want to go get started on those. I think I'm ready for a break. We're going to break for lunch, and we're going to come back at 1:30 Eastern Time.
I'll be right back.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you coming back here after lunch. Just like to check and see, are the people on the bridge back on? Richard, Laura, Bernard, I know for a few names.
Yep, Richard. I'm Richard. This is Richard. I'm here.
Brad Hodges is here.
Okay, Brad, good.
Joel is out here.
Bernard will be here. All right, excellent. We're going to go with the idea that we're ready to, let's go ahead and get started here for the afternoon session.
Also, this is Donna Pat here, too.
Okay, thank you. Before we get back into some of the recommendations and document and the report discussions, we're going to turn some discussion over to Karen for a few minutes. So, Karen, the floor is yours.
Thanks. I'm sorry I couldn't be here this morning. I want to thank you, first of all, for all the extensive work that you've been doing. I've been following from afar the various emails going back and forth. Mostly, I see, you know, some terrific efforts and lots of people that are very, very engaged. And again, I want to thank you for that. I have been a little bit concerned about some of the concerns some of the things that have come up in two respects. One, and if I can just get the attention of the people down there, thank you. I was just trying to say, I was thanking the group for everything that you've done so far. I'm concerned about two things that I've seen on the listserv. One is questions about accessibility during the teleconference calls, and I'm hoping that you're resolving these. It raises some real concerns when a committee that has this many consumers on it, when I see aggravation raised by people or concerns raised by people that the consumers are not being able to participate fully. So I just ask you to please make sure that whatever methods you use are those that will fully, and I don't want to get into a discussion here, I'm just saying that we're monitoring this, and I want to make sure that the methods that you use have been modified to fully allow participation because of the amount of time that's needed in a conversation when a sign language interpreter is used versus being able to go back to the sheet and go back and forth between the sign language interpreter and the sheet. Hopefully you're resorting a little bit more to maybe methods where you're distributing documents and editing them and sharing edits via email or other methods that will be more equal to everyone. So that's just my first concern. The second is that I've read some concerns by some of you that I guess you've been working on a wiki where some people put down something on the document and then other people change it. And this is very common in committees, so I'm not saying not necessarily to do it this way, but I just want to remind you that at the end, which is not that long from now, we need a product. And it's fine however that product is provided. It could even be two separate products. We just need you as the experts to provide us with recommendations. If you can reach a consensus, that's fine. If you can't, that's also fine. We just want your expertise. That's why you're here. So keep that in mind. We have an obligation to draft rules, especially with the NG 911 proceeding now going on. We have an obligation under the CVAA as well to take whatever recommendations you give us and to try to turn them into actual policy that we're going to implement. So keep that as the end goal. Again, it's fine with us if you have a general document that is a consensus document with separate statements or 3 or 4 separate documents. It doesn't really matter. We just want your expertise to come to us. However you think that's the most productive would be terrific. Just remember that we're going to be doing something here, so if you don't give us anything, if you can't agree and decide not to give us anything, then we just have to do it ourselves, and that would defeat the whole purpose. And you've put in so much incredible work that I don't think anybody really wants that to happen. So again, thank you for everything that you've done. Keep on trucking, and we're looking forward to seeing your final report or multiple reports in the next month and a half or so. Thanks. Next 2 months.
This is David. I don't think there's any questions for you, Karen. So thanks for that. I just kind of wanted just to make a couple of points, or at least one point that I made earlier, and I know I made some language about minority reports, and I want to clarify that this document is not a majority in the report and then minority reports. The intent of the document would be to have consensus of the document. In theory, we would all agree on one document, and that could go forward. But we understand, and Karen just talked about, there could be different opinions or different recommendations. So there could be other ones. There isn't more weight to one over the other, and I apologize for maybe how I was speaking about that this morning, and I think there was a little confusion. So again, as much as we can to consensus, but all recommendations have equal weight in terms of what's going into the report.
And not only in terms of how it goes into the report and how it's received by the commission. All recommendations will have equal weight.
So just wanted to clarify that. I know we're talking about some other processes and stuff, and we might come back to some processes again as we go through some of the afternoon discussion. But really what we have on the agenda for this afternoon is really the recommendations, and we're going to ask the policy subcommittee to present the current state of their recommendations, and then we will take a short break and then go right into the well, I have a public comment on here, but the technical subcommittee. We'll see how, we'll just go with the flow here a little bit. So I'd like to turn it over to the policy subcommittee for the current state of recommendations. Is that Angel?
Thanks, David. Angel with Comcast here. In regards to the policy subcommittee and our status, we created our first draft from a policy recommendation perspective. It was about 10 pages worth of contributions and copy, or originally. From a review perspective, we've covered about 3 pages of those 10 original pages. There was some additional work that was done from Bob's perspective in working with Christian with some additional copy and content that there were questions about whether it belonged on the technical subcommittee or the policy subcommittee. So we're trying to flush those things out to cover this additional content that's in there, and obviously figure out if it goes on one side or the other, and then review it as a subcommittee as well. Just to kind of give everyone a little bit of background on what we're working on. Obviously, we're working towards a due date of 10/28, October 28th, to provide our final draft for this section to the EAAC co-chairs. The information will include policy recommendations, as well as related to that, education and outreach recommendations. Not only, the group felt not only was it important to provide some recommendations from a policy perspective, but to also include education and outreach concerns, rationale why that's needed, and hopefully some guidance to the commission on the importance of this work and the best way to go about getting it out there to that community and getting that information out there. As far as topics, just to kind of give some background, the current contributions and the content covers things such as rate of challenges with the rate of adoption to migrating to NG 911, interoperability and standards issues, common standards, how differing environments might have their own formats or standards, but ensuring that the common points between them have some sort of common standard that they can talk to each other. Dependencies in this overall migration from NG 911. It's not only from a service provider perspective that some changes might be needed, but as was mentioned earlier this morning, from a PSAP perspective, as well as equipment manufacturer software. I mean, there's a lot of players along this chain, and it doesn't do anyone any good to have one chain upgrade or update it when the others are not. So, those dependencies, all the things that need to happen across the chain to make sure that from end to end we're able to support this new environment. Liability, obviously, reviewing existing statutes and identifying either roadblocks or gaps in liability protection across the different stakeholders and players that will be involved in this, as well as funding issues. And obviously the topic of funding is probably comes up on every one of our full EAAC meetings, but that's one of the other major categories that we're looking at from a policy subcommittee. As far as upcoming work, we are having weekly meetings. So we have 2 more weekly meetings from our regularly scheduled timeframes before the October 28th deadline. And if needed, depending on how we progress, we can obviously meet more to ensure that we get this done within the deadline. And I'll pause now just in case there's any questions or if Bob wants to add anything else.
Okay. I just want to mention one thing. I know that I just said, I want to take something back that I just said. I know that I said that all recommendations would have equal weight, but I do want to emphasize that where you reach a consensus, if you could, it will make a difference. I mean, if all of you reach a consensus and there's one dissenting entity, the commission is going to probably lean towards looking at that consensus. If you look at what happened with the VPAC report, that's a good example where we have not adopted final rules. We have not decided anything, but that group, the VPAC group on IP captioning, did come to a fairly full consensus on almost all issues. And if you look at the notice of proposed rulemaking that stemmed from that report, it mirrors that consensus to a large extent. So I just want to modify what I just said, that where you reach a consensus, it really does help. Again, if you can't, then separate statements would be fine, or separate recommendations would be fine.
Angel with Comcast again, and I guess to follow up on Karen's comments, our hope as co-chairs and obviously as a subcommittee is to try and reach consensus. I guess, you know, the topic has been covered already this morning, so I just want to make sure we are working through that as a subcommittee. We have run into some issues and topics and scenarios that, you know, we don't all agree. We're trying to hammer those things out to make sure that we come up with recommendations that not only cover the issues but also address some of the concerns that the multiple stakeholders have. And depending on the topic or the scenario and a potential recommendation, it could affect, you know, whether it's a service provider, a consumer, or a manufacturer, and so forth. So we're trying to make sure that the intent is to cover and create and craft recommendations that not only look to solve the issues that we're looking at, but also account for all the potential gaps, issues that might arise in trying to make that happen.
I wanted to add to what Angel just said, because Sherry and Angel were trying to figure out how we can spend our next 2 weeks and how we resolve the different issues by going through the different topics. And I want to assure all of you that we will include all perspectives in each of the sections, and it may be necessary to expand some of the discussion in Chapter 12 and some of the issues that we may not have adequately addressed. Christian and I have also developed a new section that deals with general and specific obligations of the covered entities. And Christian and I don't know where to put that new section, whether it's in 12A or 12B. There are some topics that may belong in 12B, or maybe it should be in both. So during our lunchtime, I spoke with Brian and with Christian and with Angel and of course myself. And I think we have a lot of work that we do have to do, but we may want to refer that section in our policy subcommittee and open it actually to general discussion. And perhaps maybe we need to refer a new section to the subcommittee for the policy section.
I know Sherry Farini. Sherry?
And this is Sherry. Can you hear me?
No.
This is Sherry. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Well, thank you for pausing and for that nice summary. I do have a question, though, for the group, and more specifically for Karen.
Go ahead, Sherry. This is Karen.
Moment. Yep. 1 second. I understand what you're saying when you say, you know, we hope as we, the group, can come to a consensus and we can come to an agreement. But I guess I'd have to say my feeling is that I don't want us to come to the point where we end up having to compromise so that we can get to a consensus. I don't want to compromise our telecommunication rights. And so that's kind of where I'm standing right now. I'm having a hard time with trying to find the line where we come to a consensus, but we don't cross over into compromise. You know, we have a report where we have to make sure we're all fair and, you know, and so on and so forth, and making sure we have standards that are the same. and so that all the agencies and individuals and stakeholders can communicate. But really, we're talking about people with disabilities who have a right to telecommunications and access. And I just really, really want to make sure that we are very careful about how we use the word and what we think of the word consensus. Because I really don't want to see the word consensus be a synonym for compromise, because I don't want to sacrifice the telecommunication rights and we water down the whole purpose of this. And that's just my concern.
This is Karen. Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, I understand your concern, and one of the things that we're most proud of is I think we've done a good job at the Commission in populating this committee with a good number of consumers that have considerable expertise in this issue, as well as a number of people that work for the federal government who happen to be deaf themselves. And so I think you have a very strong base within which you can work and figure out if there are places where there's some give and others where you can't give. I mean, as you know, policy making is always about give and take. That's not necessarily at the expense of one's rights. Sometimes it's a matter of phasing in requirements. Sometimes it's a matter of adopting interim requirements and then more stringent requirements later on. There are various ways that committees like this can reach consensus without compromising the right to emergency access. I don't think anybody's truly expecting that to happen. So within the framework of assuming that there will be eventually complete access as needed by the community, there still may be places where there's room for negotiation. And again, I ask you to work with and among your peers on the committee to see if that's possible. And if it's not, again, then we still invite recommendations, and if necessary, separate recommendations. We just don't want you to, the one thing that we don't want to happen is for you to leave without giving us something that we can work with.
We're going to go, I don't know, L? I'm sorry, I missed somebody.
I'm wondering why the minority work with the majority while the Commission doesn't. When the Congress does not. No, rather. Misinterpretation. Why should the minority work with the majority while the Congress does not?
Yeah, we're gonna stay out of that debate.
Just being a little sarcastic.
Thank you.
Just a joke.
Oh.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Thanks. I was going back to a comment I had made earlier about the report. Again, everything has equal weight, equal weight, equal weight. I'll keep iterating that 1,000 times. I want to clarify.
Let's ask the policy subcommittee if there are any issues they'd like to raise now for discussion.
Yeah, so Norm?
This is Norm Williams speaking. We've been working on recommendations that where we see the question as, are we to continue working on solutions for access for the deaf community, or should we be working on access for the population or the public at large? Should our focus be on deaf access, or should we also be working on access for everyone to the system?
The CVAA tasks you with working on access for people with disabilities, not only access for people who are deaf, but it does not task you with working on access for the general population, only to the extent that people in the general population have disabilities. Now, some of that may spill over, obviously, and as you can see from the NG 911 proceeding, in some ways, what you are doing here will be leading the charge for what ultimately may become the NG 911 system, because that system is going to be relying on data, text, and video in a way that's going to first and primarily probably benefit the population of people with disabilities. So you have the unique opportunity to provide recommendations for a system that's ultimately going to benefit the public at large. But your focus is people with disabilities.
I think there was a comment from...
And I'm sorry, that was Karen Strauss for people who are on the phone.
This is Dave. I think there was, Greg had a comment and then Angel.
Angel first, because...
Okay. We'll do Angel first, and then I know Bob also has.
Angel with Comcast. I guess to that earlier question / comment, just to kind of share a little bit of our interactions. I think part of the challenge we've had as a subcommittee is we're trying to be forward-looking and create some recommendations that will allow access for individuals with disabilities, but also, trying to deal with the fact that a lot of those access mediums are not available to the public at large either. So trying to solve that equation when it hasn't been solved at all, I think it's creating some issues. We're obviously trying to account for that, trying to account for some of the activities that Nina and other groups have done so far, as in pushing that envelope and laying out the roadmap to make that happen. For example, SMS or real-time text and other mediums that are not available at all or don't work today. And in regards to some of the challenges, those are devices that this community uses on a daily basis to communicate with each other, but they're not able to reach 911 through that medium. But it's not only them; it's nobody at all. So that's been some of our challenges that we've had in trying to create some recommendations that lay down that path to get there, while knowing that a lot of that it's either unknown or still in development.
So this is Karen again. Yeah, I feel your pain, because I really do understand what you're saying. I mean, basically, these are bigger questions. We've had that happen before, and where we're tasked with working on a disability issue that has bigger implications for the wider community. In that vein, your recommendations may want to be in phases, or they may want to be in steps or in parts, where you may have some general goals that you can set forth, the user requirements, so to speak. What are your user needs? What do you want to achieve? How you think you can best achieve that in an optimal environment. And then you may want to have a separate section that goes into how you think this can be achieved. It may be that you all agree in the first set of recommendations on what your so-called utopia is for NG 911, but you may not agree in the second step, in the second round, where you're just not, some of you in the industry may not be ready to put all your steps forward on how you want to get there. So that's another way to proceed with, again, going back to Sherry's comment, without compromising your ultimate access, because you will have laid out what you want your goals to be. I mean, I think that the survey conducted was really telling, and obviously I'm assuming that you've all been using it in developing the recommendations. I mean, that alone has such a wealth of material to report on. So that's another way to proceed. And, again, you may not be able to agree on this how-to. And you may want to, I know that there's been discussions about continuing the work of this committee. We're talking about it amongst ourselves. We're not sure that it would be monthly, but it might be quarterly. But again, you're always welcome to supplement what you provide to us in the report on an ongoing basis, especially since we have an NG 911 proceeding that's open. We always accept ex parte communications. So.
This David, Greg and Bob.
Yeah, this is Greg. When you were saying not to look at the mainstream, just looking at disabilities, one of the things that we have come across, though, is trying to make sure that what we do for disabilities doesn't in any way interfere or cause confusion among mainstream consumers. In other words, we want to, and as much as possible, we'd like to have the recommendations flow into what would be mainstream policy and stuff. So those areas, I think, are areas that would be okay, but just don't wander off trying to help people other than the group you've been targeted is your message.
Well, again, this is Karen. There's a fine line here because it's kind of like closed captioning where, I think I'm on now. There's a fine line. It's kind of like closed captioning where you're going to do it for the population of people with disabilities, and it's going to end up helping everybody. I mean, video access and text access, we all know, is going to help everybody. So it's not that you're prohibited from thinking about the general population, but your primary concern is to make sure that the emergency needs of people with disabilities are addressed.
Bob?
I don't want to cut short this important discussion, but I don't know whether this is a good time to talk about a new section to be added to 12A and whether something should be referred to the policy committee or the technical committee. I don't know if that's something to raise for discussion now.
The response would be, this is dated, yes, I think, let's go ahead and bring it up now, yes. That was going to be my next question anyhow when we were done with some general discussion. And I know Al has a comment.
Before we change subject, I would like to just follow up on what Greg had said and maybe follow up on the issue of SMS. Is that okay?
Sure.
If I do that before we change the topic? Okay. That's okay with you, Bob? My worry is, I don't know if you remember the issue at Virginia Tech University, where a lot of people lost their lives because they did not have the ability to use SMS at that time. So what if we agree to go ahead and limit access with disabled people to using SMS relay? And we go through this process of mainstreaming things with the general population. And by doing that, you're getting people who don't have disabilities using SMS. And God forbid something happens and we have another Virginia Tech occur where the general population finds out that the only thing that deaf people could use is this SMS relay, but it's being overrun by everybody trying to use it. By hearing people trying to use it. So what would the reaction of the community be by something like that? And it's just something that I am thinking about.
If the population finds out that people with disabilities are able to access 911 using SMS, but as it turns out, people without disabilities are not able to access 911 with SMS. If that ever became known, what would be the reactions or the repercussions from that sentiment?
I'm not going to answer that question, but go ahead, Greg, you have a comment on that.
Yeah, we had discussed this, and one of the conclusions was that it would probably be not, that if there was a solution that would work for everyone, that would be far preferable, because it would be very hard to describe to somebody why their daughter was locked in the closet, locked herself in the closet, was trying to send an SMS because somebody was attacking her, but they were told that they weren't allowed to because they weren't deaf. So that I think that the chairman had talked about this being general, and I think that if we're talking about using SMS as an interim, that if there is a mechanism that can be found that would work for everybody, that would be better. Also, we have the situation where if you have to register, there are a lot of people who are hard of hearing, there are a lot of people who are older, there are a lot of people who may find that this is going to be the best way of communication, and they may not register or think to register, and so we have lots of problems. If you set up a communication channel to the emergency and you say only people carrying a certain membership card are allowed to call for an emergency this way, that may be problematic. So I think that's something we should take into account and think about, so we don't bring a backlash coming around the other way, that, you know, why do some members of society can call for help and other people can't call for help this way.
This is Cheryl King. It occurs to me that we might need to be just a little bit more informative about what this disparate system might be, and that is the recommendations from Intrado for an interim solution. And I think Greg Vanderheiden, you raised it at the last meeting here, that because we have a telecommunications relay service fund that funds relay for people with hearing and speech disabilities, there's some thought that that text-oriented relay service might be available to be modified to accept SMS from people with hearing and speech disabilities through the relay call centers, because that industry exists. We have structure, we have populations that are used to using relay, and there's a funding source for that. And I think that's one piece that our discussion before kind of alluded to, but just to clarify, that's what might be considered a disability interim step that might not be available to people without disabilities. But that's in the future. Go ahead.
I think Kristen had some comments, and then I have Sherry right after that. And then Kristen, Sherry, and Angel. Is that okay?
This is Christian. Most of my comments have already been responded to by Greg, but I just would like to briefly mention another issue related to relay. There's some resistance to that because some people have had a good argument, which I won't go into the details of now. We'll leave that to Sherry to go into. But just to make it clear, this is not just a very simple issue that we can use relay to respond to. Now, also, to talk to Greg's issue about standards and having a common access to 911 through SMS, I think that's very important, and it's something I strongly support. However, my concern is about the length of time it'll take to get there before everything will be ready for universal access. Because it's my understanding that it's quite complicated technologically and from the policy perspective. So that means that we might end up waiting 5 years. And speaking as a deaf person, I find that unacceptable.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead, Sherry. I'm sure you're going to add on to this, and then Angel. And
then. This is Sherry. Yes, thank you. I would like to expand on the point about some other things that we would recommend about creating access for deaf and people with disabilities as well. I would also like to create accessibility to the general public, and I think it's really important that we want to see it happening. Because
because it kind of reminds me of a story about Dane, D-A-N-E, and the man's name was, hold on one second. So Dane Snowden is the name of this man. And he was talking about how text, because we have access to pagers, paging devices, things like that, text is changing. It's changing the wireless world that we live in based on the facts of what we need for accessibility. So the point is that that should apply to what we are also trying to do here within the recommendations. Okay, so I'm hoping that what I'm saying is clear.
This is Cheryl King. Sherry, were you through talking?
This is Sherry. Yep, I'm all done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm not sure if what I said was clear. I hope it was.
Yes, thank you. I know of Angel, then Greg, and then Donna.
Angel here with Comcast. Angel here with Comcast. I'm glad the relay example came up because I think it's come up in a couple of discussions here from a policy subcommittee, where some of the advocates have indicated that that might be a viable option, whether interim or through an additional means, and others have not agreed with that in the context of wanting equal access and use of any kind of relay would not meet or suffice. So I'm glad it came up here, but I mean those have been some of the discussions that even within our subcommittee and the advocates themselves, we haven't had consensus. We haven't been able to reach consensus because we're trying to get from point A to point B. There's many different paths in between to get to that end point, and then obviously there's differing opinions depending on what might be a viable option.
Great.
This is Greg. Okay. There was on the things we were working on. There were several of the strategies that involved using national relay funded from the relay fund, and this had two problems with it. One of them was the one where consumers really would like to be able to communicate directly and not through a relay, and the second one was that if you did it, then it would have to be something that you somehow restricted to people who are deaf, or you'd drain the relay fund by everybody else. And then we came up with this problem that nobody could figure out how to solve, and that is, how do you, in an emergency situation, limit it to only some people, and how do you bring yourself to tell somebody who's in trouble that, that you're not going to help them because they're not of us, whatever. And that's where we came back to this, if we do a solution. Then there were a number of solutions that came up that would allow direct access. And if there were direct access, then there was the question of why would it necessarily have to be limited to consumers who are deaf or speech impairment or something else. And it also would be better from the standpoint that something that's in place and being used all the time by the general population is much more likely to be there when consumers who are deaf, let's say you're in a smaller community, so there's not a lot of people coming in, the emergency system is more likely to work for people who have disabilities if it's already being used by general groups as well. So that was sort of biasing toward a direct access kind of approach, both from the funding and also the equity, fairness in an emergency. You know, you want everybody to be able to use any channel, and a lot of people are afraid to talk if they're hiding, but they could do something else, that kind of thing. Thanks.
I have Donna, and then Brian, and then Al. Donna?
Hi, and this is Donna here. In thinking about this, I have a huge concern about calling 911 through a relay service because of the time involved. Time is of the essence, and every second counts. And as far as Richard and I have done test calls on 911 relay services using the video phone and video relay services and with web IP, and it took over 4 or 5 minutes to connect with 911. My goodness, that is unacceptable. So that means, how long should it take to connect with 911? That aside, if we didn't do that, direct access seems much more reasonable. And that's something to at least try out.
Thank you, Donna. Brian?
Brian Daly. Brian Daly, AT&T. This is all very good conversation, and certainly the message is, heard loud and clear on the pros and cons of relay, and I don't want to address that here. That's not for this. But I just would like to throw into the mix that it's also a number of other trade-offs that need to be considered. When you're looking at any type of service, it does have to be end-to-end. It's just not a matter of entering 911 into an SMS program. There has to be somewhere to deliver that, and the other end has to be able to receive that. And when we're talking about 6,000 to 8,000 PSAPs across the country, there's that consideration that must be accounted for when we're talking about direct access, and every component in the middle as well. And it's also a time and availability. We hear the message loud and clear about not having a method to communicate in the short term. Well, we need to take that into account as we look at various solutions, because if we're talking about need to modify 6,000 to 8,000 PSAPs to receive those messages, what's the time period for that versus what's the time period to put something else in place that may get a communication method available in the nearer term and eventually could evolve as technology advances within the PSAPs. Thank you.
Al?
I believe that if we use SMS relay services for everyone, the funding then should be from USF, the Universal Service Fund, which is collected from everyone. Therefore, and for everyone. Then that way we don't have to think about using the TRS fund only. We could use the general fund, the USF fund. Oh, go ahead.
Norm?
A thought just occurred to me. Maybe one of the better solutions we could consider is a state is required to handle all of the SMS calls within that state, and then it could be expanded directly to individual PSAPs. So start at the state level of a state level PSAP association in the beginning. And once technology improves, then we can move into the direct idea. Just an idea that had just occurred to me. I don't know if that would help. But instead of each PSAP nationwide having to have access right now, maybe we could move to more of a statewide in the beginning, the state level in the beginning.
Okay, you want to respond to that, Elliot?
Actually, I was going to respond to Al.
Oh, okay. We're going to let, Elliot's going to respond, then I have Mark Fletcher and Sherry.
Just in response to Al, I think, although certainly it's worthwhile making all recommendations, we do have to consider that certain recommendations may require acts of Congress, and that's a much longer process than something that the FCC can do by regulation or Department of Justice can do by its regulations. And in the case, for example, of Universal Service Fund, there's the high cost fund, the low income fund, the schools and libraries, and the rural health care. And there isn't a provision in the Universal Service Fund for relay, emergency access relay services, for example. So I think we just have to think about when we're making, when the EAAC is making recommendations, what it would take to implement such regulations.
Al?
Yes, this is Al. I just wanted to make it clear, SMS relay is not for deaf people. It's for everyone. So it's general, and it would fit general communication access. It would be communication access between cell phones and 911. Is that part of the USF? I mean, if not, then maybe 911 should have their own funding mechanism to pay for that. It's not special. It's not special for special individuals. I mean, we're trying to think out of the box here. Where there's a will, there is a way.
This is Elliot again. I understand what you're saying, but the problem is the USF statute is specific, and so that's why I was saying that I'm not suggesting don't make the recommendation, but the realization is that would take an act of Congress.
So we're going to go to Mark, Sherry, Bernard, and then Matt.
Mark Fletcher with Avaya. Just to respond to Norm, a few months back I gave a presentation on the persistent contextual collaborative conferencing. And the whole idea behind that was to be able to take a specialized resource such as video relay and expand that or make that available out to a wide geographic region, whether that be countywide, statewide, or even start out nationally. And that's a way to bridge into providing that type of service. And that is part of the NENA I3 specification, the conference room, as Greg calls it, which is a great way of explaining that. So keep in mind that conferencing model that's part of Next Generation 911. So any call taker anywhere on an ESI network being identified that they need video interpretation could then bring that resource into the conference to provide that service, regardless of the geography. And that could even be a paid-for service that was brought in as well.
This is Norm, and I was speaking in terms of the short-term NG911. So SMS being statewide now in the beginning.
Okay, great, thanks.
And eventually expand it from there.
I have Sherry and then Bernard.
And this is Sherry. You can hear me, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. One moment, please. When I think about SMS relay, I don't think we should support that. I think that we should be doing what Greg V suggested with his new solution of direct SMS instead of SMS relay. In any case, we want to create, and we have to create recommendations and make recommendations so the goal is always honored and that we understand that it's for the general population so that the general population can benefit from this. And so we have to kind of become pioneers for what we're looking to do. I guess if I could say it that way. And we have to find a way for advanced communication. There needs to be several interim solutions, not just one, not just email or SMS or anything, or just one solution. There needs to be several until we come up with a final solution that we can really get behind and support from all the recommendations that we're coming up with now. And so this is all happening now, and we're figuring it out now. And of course, you know, funding is very important. Of course, I understand that we do have to remember the funding piece and the legal perspective and the legislation perspective, and you know that can take some time. And we have to worry about National 911's office and making sure that they're involved and working with them so that we can create or develop a program for funding it, whether it's taxing everyone so everyone helps contribute to the 911 fund for 911 access so we can have equal access and advanced communication. And I guess I want to say that, you know, we need to really focus on that when we come up with our report, interim and long-term solutions and proposals. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yes, I think yes. I think we've got that in there. So I have Bernard, then Matt, and then Joel. Bernard. Bernard, you on?
Sorry, my mic was on mute.
Oh.
I'm aware of two presentations that we had for our consideration. One was from Brian Daly, and another was from Greg. Were either of those SMS relay? It wasn't my impression that they were. So I'm not really sure what the term SMS relay refers to. Is it either one of those or something else?
Go ahead, Greg.
This is Greg. We actually put three different things out there for discussion. The first one was an SMS relay, where you send an SMS to a central point, and they would then you would automatically check, and if the local center would take it direct, it would send it, and if it didn't, then somebody would pick up the phone and immediately call the local center. Okay. This was not sending SMSs to the normal relay system. This would be a high, quick response, people that did nothing but this. But the concern was raised about the direct and also the relay fund that we talked about before being tapped. So then a second one was put out, which was just called direct access, DAT. And this one was just basically taking the redirection part of the CAT, the first one, and eliminating the relay. And that just required that the local centers be able to do it. The third one was one that got rid of the need for a central entirely and piggybacked on the 911, and that's the one that was sent out just most recently, and it was called Simple Two-Step. And that one also does not involve relay. So only the first one involved relay. The second two approaches, one of them was central without relay, and then the last one was something just came up or just figured out this week actually, and that was a way of doing it that didn't involve any central facility and no relay, and would piggyback on all of the information and systems there are today, so that the SMS would come in, but it would actually have, it would come in by incorporating a call through the 911 voice channel. So when it arrived at the local place, it would automatically be sent there the same way any voice call is, and it also would show up with all of the same location information that a voice 911 call did, and it also didn't require that the local SMS numbers be known. So that's what went out just this week, so people may not have had a chance to read it, but one problem was identified just today or yesterday around some phones can't, once you do a 911 call, they lock everything else out. But since yesterday, we figured out a solution to that also. So we'll be putting out a revised version of that. So first one was relayed, last two are not. Thank you.
And Brian's was not relay, I think, also.
Yeah, we're going to give Brian a second to respond into this conversation. Brian?
Thank you. Brian Daly, AT&T. Yeah, I think Greg pretty well described the essence and what we had brought in. It would be an intermediary function that would, one, determine whether or not a PSAP was capable to receive the SMS directly, in which case it would forward it on, or if not, then it would form as somebody would pick up the phone and call them, as Greg mentioned. With regard to the, what I'll call the voice call then SMS, this solution has been around for some time, and in fact, Canada has looked at this and trialed it. It may be worthwhile to get a look at their results and see what their experience has been within their trial of that. There was a report published 3 or 4 years ago, I believe, which described the solution, and my understanding is they took that a step further and actually did a trial in Canada. Thank you.
I'm going to double right back to Bernard. Did that kind of answer what you're asking?
Yeah, I think that outlines the proposals. It would be good for us to get into, be able in the subcommittee, get into detailed discussions of those things for the short-term recommendation, so that we can.
All right. So now I have, did you have a comment to that, Greg? Sorry.
Yeah. This is Greg. This might be a good idea to piggyback on earlier we talked about forming little smaller groups to do something. It might make a lot of sense to form a little tiger team, if you would, of anybody who wanted to sit down and talk through, and then come up with, say, well, here are the different things on the table, since we now have, I think, 4 or 5 that are all some of which are similar to each other, etc. But come down and say, well, can you describe, 1 or 2 or 3 generic approaches, and what's the best you guys could come up with, and have them all together so that they could be seen. And I think that would be useful to the committee. But that might be an example of this idea of a targeted group that we talked about earlier. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be good, and also we may need a similar thing for the BRS.
Thank you. This is Cheryl King. Following up on that suggestion, how about next Thursday, October 20th at 2 o'clock, a teleconference?
Sounds good.
Participation around the room or on the conference bridge? Anyone able to do that?
Bernard, I'll volunteer.
Joel Zev, I'll volunteer.
Bernard, Bob, Greg, Susan. Oh. Pardon? Oh, there's a CISRIC meeting at that time and day. Alternate suggestion, Brian? Oh, you could do Thursday? Okay. Okay. All right.
I'm good as well, Sharon.
Okay. I have Mark, Brian, Bernard, Bob, Greg V. Anyone else? I'll get a teleconference bridge and send out the information to everybody.
Joel Zev.
Joel, yes, thank you. Okay. 2? Christian? Okay. All right. And you can do your homework between now and then?
Yeah, at least 2 hours long.
At least 2 hours. Mm-hmm.
This is Sherry.
Yes. Go ahead, Sherry.
Thank you. I need to leave now, so thank you for letting me participate.
All right, thank you, Sherry. So we're setting up for next Thursday at 2 for 2 hours. I'm going to jump back to the conversation because Matt has had his hand up for a little bit, and then I have Joel. So Matt. Your mic's on.
Just gonna wait for the feed. Okay, Matt Gerst, CTIA. So turning back to some of the policy discussions.
Thank you. Good, yes.
Back from the technical issues. I did want to turn back to this USF discussion because I think it sort of highlights a broader policy discussion that we've been having in the subcommittee and struggling to address, and that's the FCC's got authority over certain types of services.
Hey, this is Richard. Can I interrupt real quick?
Sure.
I just want the interpreter and the captionist to, we're having a hard time hearing. Can you just start over and just repeat everything? That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is Matt Gerst of CTIA, and I just wanted to turn back to the policy question, and I thought the USF discussion and in the context of SMS Relay was great because it really showcased a broader policy issue that we've been having in the subcommittee and struggling to address, and that is the fact that the FCC has authority over certain services. Some of the goals that I think we all share would extend to services that may not be within the FCC's jurisdiction. And so how should we address that in our recommendations? Should we use the terms that are consistent with the FCC's jurisdiction and just point out the gaps? Or should we take a broader approach? I think that's something that we've been struggling with and hoping that the Commission might be able to respond to.
I'm sorry. Working on our teleconference for next Thursday. Would
Patrick's.
Please, because I didn't hear the question.
Okay. Oh, sure. I think, regardless, the recommendation should focus on, of course, what the FCC has jurisdiction. That would be most helpful to us. But if you feel as if it, certain of your conversation merits something outside of our jurisdiction, there's nothing in the rules that says you can't address that as well. Am I answering your question there? I don't think I am, but do you mind rephrasing it? Or giving me an example of some of these services that are outside of the Commission's jurisdiction?
Sure. So Matt Gerst, CTIA. I don't think I have it, I think we can go back and look at where the draft is and point to a couple areas, but I think maybe what we sort of need some guidance on is whether we need to be identifying those gaps and pointing out where, there may be some question as to whether the Commission would have jurisdiction over these types of services, or in the alternative that we should be using the terms the Commission, that we know that the Commission has jurisdiction over, and staying within that framework.
I think if you could identify those gaps, it would be helpful, but I don't have a set answer on that. Do you, Cheryl?
No, yes, obviously, it would be better if the Commission has jurisdiction over a recommendation so that we might be able to do something on it. But if there are other areas, yes, we should be made aware of them. But on the universal service issue, that came into being as a result of the 1996 Telecom Act. And at the time, the issue was, were there high enough speeds telecommunications networks in the states, and there was just very poor service at that time, and the Universal Service Fund was really directed toward that with the eligible telecommunications carriers, et cetera. And as we said, then as Elliot mentioned, the Universal Service Fund has established pockets of funding, but I think it would be a stretch to go to the Universal Service Fund for this issue without congressional action.
So, Matt Gurr, CTIA, just to respond, I think USF, that's a great point. Maybe one example is there's been some suggestion that images should be transferred, be accessible in order to be transferred to a public safety answering point. And while I think we all share that goal, and that's part of the Commission's NG 911 proceeding to look at, how to facilitate that sort of data, I'm not aware of anywhere in the Commission's jurisdiction where they have authority over the sending of transmission of images. So I think those are just areas where we would point out and say, we could point as a committee and say, we all share this goal, but we're not sure that the Commission would have the authority to, create a policy or a recommendation on that.
I would agree. That's the best way to handle that situation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I have Joel and then Christian.
Thank you. I just want to, we're losing sight, I believe, of the target of this afternoon's meeting, and that's setting up the recommendations and working on a more global kind of thing. I believe what's clear is that everyone feels that immediate access to 911, immediate access is necessary, which really implies that we need a two-step process, at least a two-step. One is using an existing system to get in place right away at 911 or access to 911. And the second is, as we talked about a couple months ago, longer range things that we don't even know what exists yet. And our goal should be to set up a system that's universal to meet everyone's need, people with disabilities, but at the same time be looking at and recommending shorter-term solutions. And the well-funded relay system that's sophisticated could really be set up as an interim step, clearly as an interim step, to give tomorrow, if you will, 911 access. We also have to remember that 911 centers have different levels of sophistication, and there's still areas of the country that may not have a 911 number that's used. There are rural areas, I know in New York still, that don't have 911. So we really have to be looking in a more global kind of way in our recommendations, not something in a mindset of here's what we have now. We need to be dreaming a little bit going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Appreciate bringing us back a little back on target. And Christian, you're up.
Go ahead, Christian.
Hello?
I think it helps them first.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
I want to add on to what Matt had said, because I think that all of us realize that the FCC shares the responsibility along with other agencies such as DOJ, and we all know what those responsibilities are, but I think that we also need to emphasize access. Accessibility is impossible to look at just accessibility in isolation. You cannot. Accessibility means end to end, and all of the connections, all of the parts that are supporting it. So, for example, when you talk about, in the technical committee, we were talking about an issue of terminals. Terminals at the PSAPs, that they are not under the FCC's jurisdiction, but it has an impact on access. And so here at the EAAC, as a committee, we're trying to figure out what are the points in the area, what are the access points? And we do not have other committees. So I think that we have to emphasize that we have to make available enough access point to point so that we understand that there are some who are not going to be impacted by the FCC, but regardless, here within this committee, we have responsibility for a larger picture, the general picture of access, and we're addressing these issues, and these are the issues that are coming up. We understand that within the recommendations, there may be recommendations for information purposes, but I think that we still have to put that into perspective to make clear the issues there are of access, that they need to be filled in, that they all need to be filled in. Everything is covered.
This is David. There are no additional hands raised, and I don't see anybody else needing a comment right now. I'm going to propose we get ready to take, before we break, maybe we'll just do one other thing. We'll do the public comment period and then take a short break. So I don't know if anybody from the public has any comments that they want to make. Did I miss someone?
Al speaking. Don't forget that we have a 10-hour, can I have the camera on me, please? About 10 hours ago, Bob Mather had wanted to talk about the recommendation 12A or 12B rather, and I had asked if I could follow up with something on another issue, another topic. I thought that was supposed to be a very short issue, but it turns out that it became very long, so let's not forget Bob's original comment.
It's not forgotten. Do you want to go into that now, or you want to take a short? It looked like we could use just a few minutes here. So, again, I'm going to go right into the public comment period. Are there any public comments? All right. None. We'll come back at, let's try to come back in like 5 after 3, because I know 10 minutes is never enough for you. So 5 after 3.
Well, in fact, Richard Ray and Donna Platt, as co-chairs of the NENA Accessibility Committee, they have made test calls. I have a CD of them upstairs, and they are more of it. They're very scared. You could ask Richard.
Everyone, we're going to pull together here in about 30 seconds. We have another 6 hours to go, so let's get started.
Just kidding.
I'm going to stretch the legs a little bit.
I gotta put it at least for Monday. It's gonna take me 3 days to recuperate.
For what?
I need Monday off.
Didn't you have Monday? Wasn't that a holiday?
David, are you on the line?
All right,
David, this is Richard.
Yeah, Richard, we're pulling everybody right back together here now.
Okay, and before you start, is there any way that when we get started that I can make a really quick announcement when we get started?
Absolutely.
The vendors
Absolutely.
that provided the lunches and the breakfast?
I'll let you know.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, David.
Okay, you're welcome. Well, all right, everyone, welcome back after our short break. Just before we get into the discussions that we started, as I think Al mentioned 10 hours ago, Richard Ray wanted to make just a quick announcement. So go ahead, Richard.
Hi, everyone. This is Richard. Thank you, David. Yes, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank all of the people who I sent individual emails to and asked to provide some support for breakfast and lunch, so for sponsorship for today and for future meetings. So first I want to thank Angel Arajo with Comcast for providing lunch today and for his participation, and for providing virtual lunch for the participants as well on the phone. So thank you so much. And then also I wanted to thank all the future vendors who will be supporting the breakfast and lunches for the month of November. I want to thank Brandon Casper of Vonage, and then for December I'd like to thank Greg Felds and Daniel Falk. They're from RIM. And then for January, Matthew Gertz, and then from CTIS. So CTIA, sorry. Thank you very much. And David, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Richard. Yes, Angel and Comcast, thank you again for everything today. Now, jumping back into EAAC activities, I think the discussion moves right over to Bob, who has had some things he wanted to get said. So, Bob, all yours.
Thank you. Last week, during all of the emails that were flying among the members, in order to set up some kind of a framework, we wanted to look at the various obligations, general and specific obligations, for those covered entities, service providers, relay providers, manufacturers, and that's both wireless and software providers, network manufacturers, and other entities. Christian and I had worked on some of the language, and we kind of tossed it out there for general discussion. And we really do need your comments and your ideas, changes, what have you. And that is so that we can recommend those for general and specific obligations for those covered entities. We added to our chapter 12A and Christian also 12B. And I know last week some of you did not have the opportunity to review that. However, the question that Christian and I had discussed is whether this would go to the subcommittee or not. So we had agreed that in order to get a lot of that work placed and put into the subcommittee, we suggested that the policy committee take the lead. Brian, Angel, and myself said that there was no problem with that, and so we wanted to toss that out on the floor for discussion.
Christian?
Okay. I briefly wanted to give a little background to this discussion and how this whole thing started. In the technical committee, there was a lot of disagreement about what to do with the standards and what we should specify, what would be covered and what would not be covered. Some people suggested that it would be a good idea to write down all of the requirements and obligations. So Bob and I agreed to do that. And Brian Daly from AT&T also helped out in that effort, figuring out what to do. So we started that in the technical subcommittee. And then through discussions with Bob, we realized that this list of obligations really impacts both policy and the technical subcommittees. So that's the reason that we started to get confused, because we weren't sure where specific items should be placed. The technical subcommittee has a lot of work to do that is left, and there's a whole list of recommendations that have not been covered. So we agreed that maybe it would be best to give the policy folks some of these because they have more time available to look at those particular issues. But I would like to emphasize that the technical subcommittees, why are people laughing? I know. Okay, maybe I'm wrong. Okay.
Angel's not.
But I just wanted to emphasize that this list of obligations really impacts the work of both the technical subcommittee and the policy subcommittee. But if the policy subcommittee could take the lead, then we would also be kept in the loop of what was going on with that.
And any comments from the policy subcommittee?
Well, that's Bob.
Bob, Angel, I think Matt was not, but
Angel here with Comcast. I think I touched on this a little bit earlier when we were talking about status. So in regards to kind of what we have to cover, we had the 10 original pages of recommendations that were submitted from as far as content that we need to review as a subcommittee and agree on language. And I believe this added another 6 or so pages of copy for us to go over. I mean, I think in general, my personal opinion is if we have the time, I don't see an issue going over this. I guess my only concern is it's the timelines that we have and whether or not we can do it, considering kind of the pace that we've gone through and the level of effort taken to gain consensus in our existing recommendations. So I mean that's the challenge. But we're up for it. Whether we can cover all of it within the time frame, it's obviously the difficulty there of achieving that goal.
Greg, did you have a comment? Nope. Okay. Bob?
For discussion purposes, I think I'm tossing out here 2 options. If the policy committee finishes these first 10 pages, should we then separate emails on this new section and send it to the entire committee instead of adding it to the current policy committee agenda we're working on now?
I'm sorry, yeah, we were just a quick discussion, but you're saying that, so this policy subcommittee has 10 sections that are, or 10 sections that are done, and now they want to, they have it into certain mode, I'll say, at certain draft point. You want to send it out to the broad EAAC committee?
Okay, thank you for asking me to clarify this. I'm talking about actually paralleling the current policy issues that we're working on now and a new separate section. So we have two items that we're working on parallel with each other.
Bob, I have a question for you. This is Al. So you're saying that you want a subcommittee of the subcommittee to work on this? Is that what you're saying? Is that what you mean?
Whatever will work, or a new committee, or a new team, or a new group, whatever it takes to work through email only.
This is Cheryl. You could follow the example that Greg Vanderheiden suggested it earlier with his Tiger issue teleconference next Thursday. You could have an ad hoc group to consider a section on covered entities. Is that my understanding of what the scope of this new area is? Okay. All right.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. So we have a new Tiger group. That's fine.
Tiger 2.
Right, and just let me know who would like to join us.
Or can we look at a date for a possible teleconference to get that started for you, Bob?
Not Thursday at 2.
Not Thursday at 2.
I'd like to know who's interested in joining, and then I guess we can discuss a date.
I'll join. Sal.
I think Matt Gerst will join.
Christian's asking Bob if you mentioned a time.
Not yet. I haven't decided a time yet.
So,
Matt?
Gerst at CTIA, just a point of clarification. The obligations that you're talking about are responsive to the scope of the EAAC charter, which is similar to the policy recommendations that have already been developed? Or is this a separate project that doesn't necessarily have to be tied into the charter? Because I'm just wondering if they need to be, what you're suggesting is these recommendations need to be merged in with the existing content, and that's what we're sort of developing a process to streamline that effort, which is supportive, but just want to clarify.
Angel?
Angel with Comcast. Looking at the content, I think there is a combination of information in here. Some of it is recommendations that I think would naturally fit in our policy group, but other items are things like maybe the network version of user requirements. So I don't think all the content necessarily fits in this section, but I think we need to kind of figure out where it should go, or where does it fit naturally in the context of what we have framed out right now in our draft report. Because some of the text is specific to recommendations like keeping an ongoing body to kind of look over these kind of issues, and other things have to do with some of the network requirements that would facilitate making this work and things of that sort. So I think there's a combination of data in here and content that we need to kind of sort out first, kind of figure out where it should go, and then hopefully then it can be incorporated into the work that's already ongoing.
Yeah, and Matt.
Matt Gerst?
Hello? Hello? Eric, okay. Matt Gers, CTIA. So is the goal, so then, to your point, Angel, then is the goal of this Tiger 2 to find out where this content should be placed into the existing framework? Or are we looking at this content to vet it? I'm sort of asking what the goal of the Tiger 2 is. Again, supportive of it, just trying to figure out what the framework is. Thank you.
This is Cheryl King. Bob and Angel, it was my understanding that you have identified an area of covered entities, and you would like to clarify, define, identify who are the covered entities, and then perhaps what their obligations or responsibilities might be as a result of the recommendations if they were adopted. Is that the scope, Bob? Yes, that is our intent, to define the scope of the covered entities and what are their obligations, if any. Are they general or specific? And when their obligations become effective. General questions. And we won't decide whether the standards or the requirements should be used for these purposes. But we may have some languages, for example, complies with this requirement, and then have a bracket where it can have something inserted. And then if there is something that would be deemed in compliance with 12A, to put that in there. And so this is what I'm trying to toss out there for discussion. This is Cheryl. Does that clarify anything, Matt? Or maybe Bob, if you could put together this idea in an email and send it out to us. You can send it to me and I can send it to the whole committee, and then we can see who's interested in it, or if they have recommendations on the language for the scope of it.
I think Donna's online, has her hand up. She might have something she wants to add to this as well. So I'd like to have Donna contribute for a second, then we'll go to Christian. Donna?
Yes. Yes, hello, this is Donna speaking. I just want to make sure that I understand clearly. Do you mean, Bob, that in the review paper that you and Christine are developing, we're going to be using that? We're going to be following that paper?
We already added to paragraph 12A and recommended number 8, and we distributed that last week, so I'm happy to resend that separately and send that section regarding general and specific obligations if you'd like us to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donna.
I'll look forward to receiving that too. Thank you.
And Kristen, and then Angel.
Christian?
Okay, just to maybe help clarify something here. The new paper that Bob and I wrote, the purpose of that was not to compete with the current technology and policy recommendations. The purpose of that paper was indeed to add some supplements that hopefully would develop future recommendations. And also, the second purpose was to give different viewpoints. Because right now we have kind of a strict line in the sand between policy and technology. But there are some overlapping issues. So this paper brings up those points to try to clarify who is covered and what is covered. And I think that part of the EAAC doesn't necessarily make that 100% clear. So we've got 2 subcommittees of policy and technology, but we need a cross-cutting view.
Angel, Matt, and then Greg.
Angel with Comcast. I think going through the content, as I mentioned earlier, and thinking about where it makes sense, a lot of the information has to do with a lot of the stakeholders on this within this chain, and some of the things that they will need to worry about or either adjust or make changes to make this work. And I think one is, I'm thinking of the concept of we need to kind of go through the content and triage and kind of figure out where it fits best. Because just thinking from a flow perspective and how we worked on the other sections, for example, section 5 with user requirements, this is kind of the user requirements version of what the network has to do, what the devices will have to allow or be able to do, and so forth. And I think putting this information at least specific to that content at the end of the document instead of earlier on, like a user requirements version, which is towards the beginning of the document, would probably flow better and give better background as to here are all the stakeholders, here's what role they play, here's the roadblocks that they will have to deal with, etc. So I don't know if that means a new chapter dealing with other types of requirements or background. But I mean, there's a lot of background information as, relay services, network providers, hardware providers, and things of that sort. So, but not to say that there's also, there are specific recommendations within it as well. So I don't know if it's all of it can go into one section, but I think it's a matter of kind of figuring out this is a recommendation, this should go here, this is background information or introduction or overview information that should go at the beginning that says here are all the players and the role that they play.
This is Cheryl King. Yes, I've been looking at the index of the baseline document, and we do have a section up front we called normative references, and we're considering putting the standards there and a reference to the glossary. So, if you're looking for a home for this new section, it'll probably go somewhere like that because it will inform the rest of the document, as I'm understanding, right? Okay. Matt?
Matt Gerst, CTIA. I think that's, I was just to piggyback on your comment, Cheryl, I think this Tiger 2 group could look at triaging some of these things and seeing where they could fit in if they're not already being addressed in the other policy recommendations. But for those things that weren't, as Christian pointed out, maybe blur the line between technical and policy, maybe it's an appendix to the final report, or, because I know
Right.
we're not very much in favor of going back and reopening some of the documents that are already there now that the coordinating team is already reviewing and trying to compile for the report. So perhaps that's sort of the best approach, and I'd be happy to help with that effort, but just to make clear that that's what we're going to be doing.
Gotcha. That's good to me. Greg? Oh,
when we're doing the covered entities item, it might be useful if there are things that people are wondering about that are not covered by the FCC but are by somebody else. For example, we keep talking about the PSAPs and making recommendations about them. You asked for recommendations about the PSAPs, but you may not have jurisdiction, so then it gets unclear. Like some people will say, well, we shouldn't talk about them because FCC doesn't have jurisdiction, but the FCC asked. So I think in the covered entities, we could make it clear that these are places that are not necessarily covered by the FCC, but that comments are still asked for, or that we can still comment on. We just need to say, instead of saying the FCC should or something like this, we should just say that this chapter would inform us as to where we might say, well, these are things that would be important to happen in these places, and these are the places that would act on it or something.
This is Cheryl King, and during the break I went back to the statute. Again, our 7 areas of recommendations that Congress asked us to prepare, and one of them is for the establishment of technical standards for use by PSAPs, designated default answering points, and local emergency authorities. So the Congress told us to look at that and develop recommendations to the Commission. And so, what the Commission is able to do with that recommendation, it may mean that they need to refer it to the NG 911 National Office or the Department of Justice. But Congress has asked this group, with our expertise, to look at that specifically. Go ahead.
Okay, go to Angel, back to Bob.
Angel with Comcast, hopefully to try and close this out and get us to move forward. If the folks have volunteered, I think I'm hearing we'll take a look at the content, try to triage it to figure out where it best fits, whether it's under an existing section or if it's going to be in a separate section at the beginning. I'm assuming that's kind of where we're headed, in the direction of hopefully get some movement here, and maybe a small number of pages for my subcommittee to take a look at.
Right. So that's the plan. Sounds like it. Bob?
The Tiger number 2 group does not want to redo what all of you have already done. I want to make that very clear. I don't want to do it.
Point well taken. So do we have to set a, so is there an action of Bob sending out an email a little bit about the scope of this, and then we'll set up a date and some details around that and try to find a time for the triage group or Tiger Team 2?
Bob?
What I'd like to do is I will email all of you on the committee and those who are interested in joining the Tiger 2 comments, and also have an additional copy of the document that Christian and I worked on. And we'll ask you for comments and discussions, and then we'll establish that for our weekly meetings. Thank you.
So, all right, that was good. I think the next item on the agenda was I had the technical subcommittee. I think we talked somewhat about this, but it is on the agenda item, and I want to make sure we at least bring that up here. So the technical subcommittee presents current state of recommendations. Is Kristen?
This is Christian. I think we've already covered a lot of issues this morning, but I do want to add 2 things. One is drafting a list of 25 to 28 recommendations. And I know that that's a lot. I was on a call for an hour and a half on Tuesday to make sure to go through stuff, and we covered about 7, and we have like 20 left. And there's many that we have not come to agreement on yet. There's a couple where we're close to consensus, maybe 2 or 3, but there's a lot of discussion remains still as to what we're going to do. And I'm concerned about the timeline. So the biggest area of disagreement is this related to the specific standards. And maybe I'm wrong about that. If I am, please let me know. But that's what I feel the biggest area of discrepancy is. So that's a big concern. I know it's been mentioned already. Another one that's been mentioned already is the IMS. And the industry view is that the IMS is the long term. It needs to be ongoing. And it's not appropriate to take the language from I3. But the opposing perspective is how to make sure the ESENT? ESI, ESENT? Say it. ESINet. That was an interpreter stumble there. To make sure that the ESINet and the IMS are compatible for open networks. And I'm concerned that if we don't address that now, it's going to come up later as a problem. And the technical committee is working on that issue, trying to figure out a way to come to agreement about that and to solve all of the opposing views that we have at this time. So we have listed everything side by side so we can see the pros and cons of each. And I suspect that we probably will have disagreement that we're not able to solve. And we'll have to submit both perspectives separately.
Yeah, I'll let Greg, just before I'd let Greg talk, I just want to make sure, these are 25 to 28 technical recommendations? Okay. And then
This is Christian, correct. It's a long list. And it doesn't mean that we'll recommend all of, that we'll keep all of them. We're working our way through them.
Okay. Go ahead, Greg.
This is Greg. I think this is another place where we might talk about taking at least a subset of these things and doing another Tiger team or something. The reason I mentioned it is that just in some discussions before the call today or meeting today, it was clear that where in places where it looked like there was conflict, there wasn't. There was just misunderstanding about what was going on, and there were also lots of different people editing, and so people were editing things that they didn't realize the consequence of it for something else. So I think that if we got together some people to focus in on some of the issues, particularly the one that was just mentioned, that there may be some common language. So it might be that a smaller group getting together and just doing some good discussions could bring something back to the technical group that would be able to move forward some of the places where it just seemed to be going back and forth, and it was only because it was involving a whole bunch of people, including some people who weren't at the meetings, and so there may be more things that can be resolved than we thought.
So this is David, so we're talking about a Tiger Team 3, that's what I'm thinking about. I'm going to express my concern now we've got a lot of work on our plates and 3 more teams of going through stuff. Theoretically, they sound good, and I hope that they can run through as quickly as it sounds. But you're going to talk about the recommendations of these 25 to 28. Look at this thing. There's concern about the multiple standard references, IMS type issues. Okay, I'm just figuring out the scope. But go ahead, Brian. You want to add something to this?
Brian Daly, AT&T. To continue with what Greg was saying, when we look at the evolution to IP-enabled networks, there's really 2 paths that I think are the main paths. One of which is IMS, which we've heard. The other is more what I would call the generic IP endpoint, IETF-based protocol path. And what we're just trying to do is to make sure there's a balance in the recommendation to understand that there are these 2 paths and that each of these paths will coexist within networks that are being deployed. And we have to make sure the recommendations account for both. I don't think it's as bad as Christian might have portrayed it. I think it's really just, as Greg said, getting the wording correct to make sure there's a fair and balanced approach between the two network evolution paths, so that each of those will support the requirements for accessibility. And regarding the I3, the I3 is again the basis for the ESI net, and there's work ongoing that will evolve the I3 to also support IMS-based networks. And it's going to be a continuing evolution over the next several years to get all the standards in place to ultimately get us to have this coexistence between different types of IP networks. Thank you.
Greg.
This is Greg. In fairness to Christian, a few days ago it did look like it was as bad as Christian said. It's just that people have been trying to, when they looked at this, both sides have been trying to get together and find something. So these are rather recent developments. But the concern, as you know, is that we are a long way, and the reason for the Tiger teams, as you said, oh my God, all these extra things, is because we only have 2 weeks to get to the end, and we're getting through about 2 or 3 provisions per 2-hour technical meeting, and we'll never get even a third of the way done that way. So the idea was to try to have smaller groups work out some language that when it was brought up to the technical group, everybody said, yeah, this looks pretty good, instead of burning up all the time in the meetings. Thanks.
No, thanks for clarifying it, because this is David. My concern was that Christian had said we only went through about 5 or 7 of these in a couple hours, and I'm thinking once a week for 5 items for the next 5 weeks, we're probably okay. So do I understand there's an agreement then that there is a Tiger Team 3? There seems to be, at least through the discussion I hear, some agreement that this is not as complicated. Christian, sorry, we're just picking on you a little bit, but hopefully that this is a little clearer, and there's got to be some coexistence of a couple of things, and maybe only one time or something. So I guess the comment is we'll have a Tiger Team 3 to kind of work this out. Again, I think between Tiger Team 1, Tiger Team 2, and Tiger Team 3, we have to find the right time, the time zones and stuff to work this out. And I only know that Tiger Team 1's commitment for next Thursday at 2 is the only one that I know has been scheduled. So I think, is that, Christian, would you put something out about this? And do we need to have Cheryl to see if there's an open slot sometime, or how do we proceed on getting everybody together?
I think this is Greg. I think we can, we can do it like a doodle poll or something like that outside, because some of the people who need to be on this aren't at the meeting here, so we can't pick a time now.
Okay, right.
So I think that would be, does that sound right to you, Brian?
Yes.
Okay, this is Christian speaking, and I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify, who's going to be setting up the scheduling? The poll, do you want me to do that, or who's taking care of that?
Christian, I think.
Greg will do Tiger 3.
Tiger 3, we can help, but Christian, I think the best thing is it's going to be reporting back, so I think that as chair of the technical, we'll do it, and we'll provide support to you. So the answer is yes, I think you're the one to lead the effort, but no, we're not the one that's going to dump all the work on you. How's that?
This is Christian saying, fine, that's clear. I will take care of it. Just wanted to be clear about it. Thanks.
Well, it's 3:45. I can just say that there is no hands raised in the hand raising tool right now. Are there any other discussions on this technical committee? I really hate to ask this question because I don't want to see Tiger Team 4 started, but I think, is there anything else, Kristen, that you wanted to add into the technical recommendations?
Well, a final comment. Okay, I don't mean to make it look like it's so bad. People have been working tremendously hard on this to find consensus, and I greatly appreciate all of everyone's work. I feel like I've learned a lot from that process, and we can figure it out. So I am optimistic that we will figure it out.
This is Cheryl King, and Christian, I know that your third co-chair, Greg Fields, is on a second honeymoon this week, so maybe he'll, did I say Angel? No, Greg Fields. Greg Fields. So I hope maybe when he comes back, he'll be able to take some of the work off of your hands. But I do want to thank everybody. This has been a productive working meeting, and that's what I expected this morning, and it certainly has not disappointed me.
Yeah, this is the same for David. And I'm going to look at Daniel at RIM to make sure he takes his notes back to Greg and email him while he's on his honeymoon. No, don't do that. I think we're about ready to wrap up. I think just in conclusion, thanks again Comcast for the lunch and all that. Thanks for the great discussion through the day. I think what we have is just to kind of summarize. The Coordination Committee again has a draft document that we are starting to go through. So I want to let you know that we're going to have a working session within our organization on the 31st. We're expecting to send the draft out to the EAAC around the 4th. We're putting that kind of loosely on the 4th. In the meantime, we still have activities with the policy and technical subcommittees are still ongoing. And now we also have the creation that I understand of 3 Tiger teams. Tiger Team 1 is meeting next Thursday at 2. There is some actions still open on Tiger Team 2. I think Bob's going to put together sort of the scope and information out to the EAC, and then we'll coordinate and get those details worked out for the time and date. And then we have Tiger Team 3, and Christian's going to put out some information about the scope as well, and we'll set up the time and date for those. In theory, they shouldn't be, but one meeting, maybe another one, but I understand there at least we're considering about 2 hours in duration of those Tiger Team meetings, and hopefully they come out of there with the output that we want into the recommendations. That is my quick summary. I don't know if Cheryl has any other summaries, or Patrick has anything he wants to add, or if anybody else has anything I may have missed.
Well, go ahead, Mark.
Thank you. This is Mark here from Purple. I have a process question. I know we're trying to finish the report by December for the December deadline. And then after that, is there a plan within the FCC to read the report? And then what kind of action will we see? So I just want to understand what's happening next. After we submit the recommendations, then what?
I love that question.
Yes, we definitely plan to read the report. I hope so. Yeah. After that, I think most likely what we'll do is incorporate it into our NG 911 proceeding that I discussed. And I can't speak for the chairman on behalf of timing for the next item in the NG 911 proceeding, but my expectation is that the recommendations that you provide to the commission will be rolled into that proceeding.
This is Cheryl. I have 3 copies of the NG 911 NPRM and 1 copy of the ACS report and order. Further notice, if anybody is interested, you may have them.
And Mark, again, a follow-up, if I may. So thank you, Patrick, for explaining that. So that means that the FCC will consider those things to be included for the next NPRM, and then will be the general public response to the NPRM, kind of the normal comment procedures that applies here as well?
Well, we don't have a set plan for that yet, whether it's going to be another NPRM or whether it would be an order, or whether these recommendations would even be looped into. That's just my expectation, and I think that's most of our expectation here, is that your recommendations will be looped into that proceeding. But there isn't a definitive FCC plan yet on what we'll do with those recommendations.
This is Mark. Thank you.
This is David. We're going to keep going a little bit more, but I kind of wanted to let everyone know that the next meeting is on November 18th. So it's not the second Friday of the month, it's the third Friday. And after that, we do not have a meeting planned for face-to-face December 9th. I believe that the November meeting is our last face-to-face meeting. November 18th is our last face-to-face meeting. There are no plans for a December meeting here at the FCC offices. So just for your travel plans and some of the coordination activities.
Yeah, this is Cheryl King. Yes, because the recommendations are due to the commission December 7th. Our thinking was that we're going to be burning midnight oil up until the 7th. And then we would not meet just 2 days after that, because the general purpose would be just for us to celebrate, and we might enjoy celebrating it by not coming to Washington, D.C., or the commission for an 8-hour meeting. For 2012, we really don't have set plans yet. Again, the EAAC is chartered for 2 years. The commission may want to have the EAAC continue as an advisory committee, actively doing something, and by January we will have all that sorted out.
And don't celebrate too hard on December 7th, because December 12th comments are due in response to the NPRM. So don't forget about that.
So please leave your table tents.
Okay.
Throw your recycling in the recycling blue bins or wherever, and travel safely.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you, thank you, thank you.